Chapter 632. On the way to the Cardinal's Hall of the Calamity Church, Wolf described the situation of the oldest cardinal to Han Shuo in great detail. He was so detailed that even Han Shuo felt a little annoyed. That cardinal was a veteran who established the Calamity Church. His name was Kironlo. The reason the Calamity Church was besieged and suppressed by the entire continent hundreds of years ago was largely due to this person. It was because he had unleashed the plague on Profound Continent, turning the civilians of many countries into undead creatures overnight. The plague was a vicious and contagious disease. Anyone who was infected by the plague or was gnawed on by undead zombies would also turn into an undead creature. Kironlo unleashed the plague in every country, causing a massive amount of undead creatures to spread. This finally enraged all the countries on Profound Continent. Before Kironlo's crazy actions, although the Calamity Church's reputation wasn't as good as the Church of Lights, it wasn't too bad. Back then, the followers of the Calamity Church had rather respectable statuses. However, due to the plague's rampage, every country on Profound Continent panicked and changed their attitude towards the Calamity Church, turning the Calamity Church into the public enemy of Profound Continent. In that Great War, the Church of Light mobilized all its white priests and traveled to every country on Profound Continent. They exhausted all their energy to purify the vast amount of undead creatures formed by the plague. It was also at that time that the Church of Light, a tiny religious organization, seized the opportunity of a lifetime and ascended to the throne of the #1 religion on Profound Continent. Meanwhile, the Calamity Church was besieged and suppressed by all the countries on Profound Continent, forever hiding in the darkness. The headquarters of the Calamity Church was also established during that period. As the main culprit behind that unforeseen event, Kironlo was extremely lucky to survive. As Kironlo was one of the oldest seniors of the Calamity Church, although some people within the church held grudges against him for his actions, they tolerated it when the Calamity Church was facing a critical moment of life and death. After that, Kironlo realized how disadvantageous his madness was to the Calamity Church. For the next several hundred years, he lived in seclusion and rarely interfered with the internal affairs of the church. Kironlo's strength was already very formidable to begin with. After several hundred years of bitter training, he had advanced even further and became one of the most powerful existences in the church. Within the church, Kironlo's influence was second only to the Pope. Many of the current core forces of the church had once received guidance from Kironlo. The long passage of time had made everyone forget about his erroneous judgment back then. After many years of silence, seeing that the Church of Light was on the brink of destruction, Kironlo once again came out to stir up trouble. The Cardinal's Hall was located at the center of the Calamity Church. The entire hall was solemn and dignified. Bright magic lamps hung high above the black stone ceiling. The surrounding walls were engraved with all kinds of images of evil gods. Some comfortable and soft magical beast hides were laid on the hard stone floor. White bones were arranged in all sorts of strange shapes and filled the four corners of the Cardinal's Hall. When Han Shuo walked in, the dozen or so cardinals of the Calamity Church, as well as that big fat pope, immediately cast their gazes on Han Shuo. The strength of these people was a mix of good and bad. The stronger ones possessed the strength of base gods, while the weaker ones were merely in the sacred grade realm. Each and every one of them looked extremely old and decrepit. Thick evil auras emanated from their bodies. Their eyes were either ferocious, sinister, or numb. Excluding the fat pope, there were a total of 13 cardinals. Among them, one was a base god, 3 were demigods, and the rest were all sacred grade experts. Most of them cultivated in the energy of death, darkness, destruction, summoning, and other elements. Before coming over, Wolf had described Kironlo's appearance to Han Shuo. Han Shuo didn't even need to use his consciousness to sense Kironlo. With a single glance, he could tell that the tall and skinny Kironlo, whose eyes glowed with a demonic green light. The aura of death on Kironlo's body was so heavy that he couldn't sense any aura of life. Kironlo looked more like an undead creature than a human. While Han Shuo was sizing up the people in the Cardinal's Hall, those people were also sizing up Han Shuo. Kironlo, in particular, made no effort to conceal the hostility in his eyes. He was constantly scanning Han Shuor's body with a gaze that could make an ordinary person's hair stand on end. All of a sudden, a soul-probing energy shot toward Han Shuor from Kironlo. When that soul energy came, the corners of Kironlo's mouth curved into a sinister sneer, as though he wanted to humiliate Han Shuor. Han Shuor, who already had a plan in mind, had a genial smile on his face from beginning to end. He cheerfully sized up Kironlo. With a thought of his consciousness, his soul energy, which was much more powerful than Han Shuor's, suddenly tightened and ruthlessly struck Kironlo. Ooah! Kironlo couldn't help but let out a soft cry after his soul energy was struck by Han Shuor. He clutched his head in pain. His appearance was neither human nor ghost, making him look even more malevolent and terrifying. After Kironlo's head felt a little better after suffering a sneak attack, he coldly stared at Han Shuor and softly shouted, You dare to attack me? Pope, who is this guy? Han Shuor didn't pay any attention to him. He merely looked at the fleshy fatty with a beaming smile and innocently said, I just came in and haven't even sat down. Why is he suddenly slandering me? None of the people present in the hall were weak. Although many of them didn't know the specifics of the situation, they could faintly sense the confrontation between the two souls. Han Shuor had a very sincere and innocent look on his face. He had obviously taken advantage of the situation, but he still acted as though he was being wronged. His ability to lie with his eyes wide open immediately won the unanimous approval of everyone present. Truly shameless and malicious. As expected of one of us. No wonder the Church of Light couldn't gain any advantage in his hand. The many cardinals in the hall secretly sighed in their hearts. They were all sinister, cunning, and wicked people. They sincerely admired Han Shuor's actions. The big fatty pope didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Han Shuor had clearly taken advantage of the situation, and yet he was still trying to act innocent. There was nothing he could say. He let out a hollow laugh and tried to mediate the situation. You must be mistaken. Before the two could say anything else, he hastily raised his voice and said, Come, let me introduce you all. This is the most outstanding young talent of our church, Brian. Hihi, I don't think I need to narrate his deeds, do I? Well done. I can tell at a glance that you're one of us. Yes, although you're not a member of the church, no one treats you as an outsider. Each of these people was more hypocritical than the next. All of them were sincerely praising Han Shuor. It was at this moment that another group of people walked in from behind. When Han Shuor turned his head to look, he discovered that it was the six-horned tribal king of the soul race and his two pentahorned subordinates. This somewhat surprised Han Shuor. He couldn't understand why a foreigner would be allowed to attend such an internal meeting of the Calamity Church. Brian, let me introduce you. These are our people. In the Great War 5,000 years ago, one of the leaders on our side came from them. As soon as the big fatty saw the soul race clansman enter, as though he knew about the grudge between him and Han Shuor, he immediately revealed his identity as the six-horned tribal king to Han Shuor. Meanwhile, Kironlo, who had just secretly crossed swords with Han Shuor, suddenly fell silent. He looked at Han Shuor and the six-horned tribal king as though he was watching a joke, as though he was waiting for the six-horned tribal king to make a move on Han Shuor. It appeared that all the cardinals present were well aware of the enmity between Han Shuor and the six-horned tribal king. They had only heard of Han Shuor's might and had never seen it for themselves. Therefore, they were still skeptical. However, most of the cardinals present had a deep impression of this six-horned tribal king of the soul race. They knew that his strength was extremely terrifying. Now that the two of them had encountered each other, their eyes were filled with contemplation. No one knew what they were thinking. It turned out that the soul race had participated in the Great War 5,000 years ago that involved all the experts on Profound Continent. Who would have thought that these foreigners were actually one of the leaders of the evil forces back then? No wonder. After hearing the Pope's words, Han Shuor was suddenly enlightened. With a quick glance, Han Shuor understood what was on the minds of the many cardinals present in the hall. He sneered incessantly in his heart. After carefully sizing them up, he saw that the big fatty pope was the only one with a calm and unruffled expression. It appeared that Edwin and Belinda had pledged allegiance to him. The two must have reported to him what happened with the six-horned tribal king yesterday. Otherwise, he wouldn't have appeared so calm. These people would look at Han Shoror from time to time, and then at the six-horned tribal king of the soul race. They seemed to be waiting for something. Kironlo was even more anxious. Seeing that the two of them had yet to fight, he suddenly thought of something. He suddenly let out a sinister laugh and said, "The two of you must be old acquaintances. According to our understanding, the two of you met Tanai at Tarag Gorge and had some misunderstandings, am I right?" Just like Han Shoror, Kironlo also believed that the six-horned tribal king wouldn't be able to distinguish a human's appearance. Therefore, he maliciously warned Han Shoror, all in preparation to see Han Shoror make a fool of himself. How could Han Shoror not know what Kironlo was thinking? "Hehe, that's right. When you were at Tarag Gorge, I indeed had some misunderstandings with this one," Han Shoror calmly admitted. The crowd's hearts tightened, as though they had all anticipated what was about to happen. Each and every one of them focused their attention on the six-horned tribal king of the soul race, waiting for him to make his move. They knew how cruel and merciless this foreigner was. He didn't have too many scruples like a human. Therefore, it was only natural that he would attack Han Shoror without hesitation. Kironlo, on the other hand, was sneering incessantly in his heart. As someone who had personally attacked the six-horned tribal king alongside the Pope, he knew better than anyone else how dreadful the six-horned tribal king was. Seeing that a good show was about to unfold, he could hardly contain the excitement in his heart. However, despite the crowd's desperate wait, the six-horned tribal king did not make his move. Instead, he ferociously pounced on Han Shoror. Everyone was puzzled. They had no idea what the six-horned tribal king was thinking. "Brian took something from you. Don't you have a grudge against him? Back then, you told me that you would definitely kill him. What's the matter?" Kironlo couldn't wait any longer. Chapter 633. Grand Elder, watch your words, the big fat Pope reprimanded in displeasure. In the Calamity Church, Kironlo was only apprehensive of the Pope because the Pope was the only one in the entire Calamity Church who possessed strength on par with him. Upon hearing the Pope's shout, Kironlo immediately realized that his words were inappropriate and restrained himself a little. "He's stronger than me," the six-horned tribal king said indifferently as he looked at Han Shoror. "What? He's stronger than you?" Kironlo was taken aback. He was at a complete loss and found it hard to believe what Kironlo had just said. Other than the big fat Pope, the numerous elders of the Calamity Church in the hall also couldn't conceal the shock in their hearts as they stared at Han Shoror. Their minds were racing and their eyes were flickering. No one could tell what they were plotting. "Yes, he's stronger than me, and stronger than all of you here." The six-horned tribal king continued to categorize Han Shoror's valiant strength with certainty, as though he was afraid that the elders in the hall didn't understand what he meant. Because they knew that the six-horned tribal king would never speak nonsense, the crowd couldn't help but feel a little more vigilant when they looked at Han Shoror. After hearing the six-horned tribal king's words, some of the cardinals who had previously reached a secret agreement with Kironlo began to reconsider whether it was necessary to abide by that agreement. "Impossible, impossible," Kironlo mumbled in disbelief. His mind was in a state of confusion and confusion. Although they were all in the base god realm, there were naturally differences in strength. After joining hands with the Pope to deal with the six-horned tribal king, Kironlo knew that the six-horned tribal king's strength was slightly more valiant than both he and the Pope due to his unique soul attack methods. As the only remaining Grand Elder of the Calamity Church, Kironlo had had dealings with the Supreme Pontiff of the Church of Light. He knew that the Supreme Pontiff of the Church of Light's formidable strength was largely due to the support of divine weapons. Even so, the Supreme Pontiff of the Church of Light was only as strong as Kironlo. According to Kironlo's understanding, Han Shoror might be able to get rid of the Light Pope by a fluke, but he might not necessarily be able to defeat the six-horned tribal king. That was why he was provoking Han Shoror in every possible way, hoping that the six-horned tribal king would humiliate or even kill him. However, no matter how hard he guessed, he could never have guessed that the six-horned tribal king and Han Shoror had already met, and that Han Shoror's strength was completely different from what he had expected. In this way, as a cultivator of the elemental energy of death, it would be very difficult for him to snatch the Calamity Church's treasure, the skeletal staff, away from Han Shoror. Brian, come and sit. The Pope of the Calamity Church was elated to see Caronlo's unsightly expression. He smiled from ear to ear and shouted at Han Shoror. Every person in a high position did not wish for others to constantly point fingers at them, and he was naturally no exception. However, Caronlo's reputation in the Calamity Church was exceedingly high. His strength was also exceedingly terrifying. Naturally, he formed a rather special force within the Calamity Church. This force could even influence his decisions at times. This made Caronlo extremely dissatisfied. It was just that Caronlo's identity and status were there for all to see. Although the Pope was dissatisfied, there was nothing he could do about it. Now, seeing Caronlo being humiliated in front of Han Shoror, the big fatty felt very comfortable. Han Shoror did not stand on ceremony. Under the Pope's beckoning, he came to the big fatty's side, found an empty seat, and sat down without the slightest awkwardness. Come, six-horned guest, come and sit beside me. While the Pope was beckoning Han Shoror, Caronlo squeezed out a friendly smile on his face and greeted the six-horned tribal king enthusiastically. During this period of time, Caronlo had been deliberately trying to rope in the six-horned tribal king, and he had indeed achieved some results. According to his thinking, the six-horned tribal king should naturally go over to him after he called out to Han Shoror. However, accidents always happen. This time, the six-horned tribal king did not pay any attention to him. Instead, to everyone's surprise, he walked straight toward Han Shoror, as though he did not hear Caronlo's call at all. Seeing that the six-horned tribal king walked straight toward Han Shoror as though he did not hear his words, Caronlo's expression turned even more unsightly. His gloomy and cold eyes constantly roamed between Han Shoror and the six-horned tribal king. No one knew what he was thinking. After sitting down next to Han Shoror, the six-horned tribal king looked at Han Shoror anxiously. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Those energy stones, where did you collect them from? Can you tell me? You don't have to think about looking for them. I've already obtained all the energy stones in that place," Han Shoror answered frankly, telling the tribal king to drop the idea as soon as possible. Upon hearing Han Shoror's words, the six-horned tribal king was filled with disappointment. He said indifferently, "What a pity, what a pity." The two did not deliberately lower their voices when they spoke. Each and every one of the grand elders present was a person of extraordinary strength. Naturally, they heard every word clearly. It was only at this moment that they realized that Han Shoror and the six-horned tribal king must have met before. They must have exchanged blows and reached a tacit understanding. Otherwise, given the six-horned tribal king's cruelty and ruthlessness, there was no way he would be so obedient. "All right, now that everyone is here, let's have a good talk," the big fatty raised his voice and lightly shouted. All the grand elders who were whispering to each other immediately shut their mouths. The big fatty nodded toward the people outside. Then, the doors of the cardinal's hall slowly closed. At this moment, all the unrelated people walked out of the great hall. When the great hall was completely closed, an enchantment was immediately triggered and enveloped the entire cardinal's hall. This ensured that no one outside could hear the conversation being held inside. Everyone present here is the cornerstone of the church. Brian and Six-Horned are also members of the church. I believe that no one has any objections to this, right? The big fatty said smilingly as he looked around after the doors of the cardinal's hall were closed. That's not necessarily the case. Caronlo's enigmatic voice suddenly sounded. He sized up Han Shoror with an unfriendly gaze and said, "Ancestor Six-Horned participated in the Great War 5,000 years ago. The church has records that can prove this. Some of the walls here also have images of the soul race. It's certain that he's one of us. However, Brian merely obtained our church's sacred weapon, the skeletal staff, by a freak combination of factors. The church has repeatedly sought him out for confirmation, but he adamantly refused to acknowledge that he's one of us. If he doesn't even consider himself a brother of the church, then why should we be so anxious to acknowledge him?" "That's true. Brian has never expressed this point. Could it be that he's rejecting our church?" A sacred magus master who also cultivated in the elemental energy of death hastily chimed in after Coronlo's words. As he also cultivated in the elemental energy of death, he had received Coronlo's guidance and had always stood by Coronlo's side. He's the master of the skeletal staff. Of course he's one of us. There's no need to dispute this point. The reason why he never acknowledged his identity before was because he wasn't aware of the close relationship between the skeletal staff and our church. Now that Brian has personally come here, isn't this enough to prove his sincerity? The big fatty was usually all smiles. However, when he put on a stern face, the aura of someone who had been in a high position for a long time would immediately become overbearing, giving off an extremely oppressive feeling. When Han Shoror saw that the many cardinals in the hall were forced to smile awkwardly without daring to say anything, he immediately deduced that the big fatty indeed had the strongest influence in the Calamity Church. His stern face and cold shout at this moment were vastly different from his usual self. Han Shoror couldn't help but take a few more glances at the big fatty in astonishment. "Don't you agree, Brian?" When the big fatty saw that no one dared to say anything due to his imposing aura, he let out another cold groan. Then, he put on a faint smile and asked Han Shoror who stood beside him. "Of course. The skeletal staff is in my hands, and I cultivate in necromancy magic. I've come here this time to make my stand clear." Han Shoror understood the Pope's intentions. His attitude was very sincere, as though he was returning home from a long journey. He even sighed endlessly after finishing his speech. How shameless. The many elders all had the same thought. They were all wily old foxes. How could they not see the true indifference beneath Han Shoror's sincere attitude? That's right. Brian is naturally one of us. There's no need to doubt him. The big fatty was all smiles again, as though the person with the stern face just now wasn't him at all. I can't see any sincerity in his words. Perhaps he covets the influence of our church on profound continent. Who knows what he's up to in coming here? H. The skeletal staff is a sacred relic of the church. For it to fall into the hands of such a junior will only bring shame to the skeletal staff. I think it's better to have him hand over the skeletal staff and slowly test if he's truly working for the church. Coronlo was determined to make life difficult for Han Shoror. When he saw that no one else dared to say anything under the pressure of the Pope, he had no choice but to step out and stop Coronlo himself. The face of the Pope of the Calamity Church darkened as soon as he heard those words. He was truly enraged. He sized Coronlo up with cold eyes, as though contemplating whether he should shed all pretenses of cordiality and disrespect his elders. The big fatty was well aware of what the Pope was thinking. At the end of the day, all he wanted was Han Shoror's skeletal staff. He believed that it was all thanks to the skeletal staff that Han Shoror could attain such terrifying strength in the short span of a decade or so. Coronlo was able to spread plagues across the entire continent. He was a madman to begin with. On top of that, the temptation of the skeletal staff was just too great. There was no way he could stop his heart of greed from gushing out. "Old thing, are you done yet?" Han Shoror impatiently shouted before the Pope of the Calamity Church could even open his mouth. Given Han Shoror's current strength, a mere base god was nothing in his eyes. The reason why he was willing to cooperate with the Pope was because Han Shoror was interested in the evil god of the church. However, Han Shoror was indeed fed up with the fact that a base god was being noisy in front of him time and time again. "How dare you disrespect your elders? In the church, which has a strict hierarchy, one must show basic respect to the elders. If you don't even know this, how can you be considered a member of the church?" Coronlo sneered as though he had caught Han Shoror's weakness. "Who do you think you are? A sinner who almost consigned the church to eternal damnation because of a single wrong decision is worthy of my respect." "You think you're worthy?" Han Shoror looked at Coronlo with cold eyes. He didn't care about the Pope's reputation at all and maliciously exposed his past. Chapter 634. "You, how dare you say that about me?" Coronlo's entire body was trembling. His face was ashen as he pointed at Han Shoror and roared like a berserk ghoul. This matter was a sore point for Coronlo. Because of his identity, No one dared to mention it to his face. Han Shuor's merciless words were said in front of so many elders. Given Kironlo's craziness, it would be strange if he didn't fly into a rage. How could Han Shuor be afraid of him? Hihi, what's wrong? Are you angry from embarrassment? Serves you right. Han Shuor sneered. He turned a blind eye to Kironlo's roar and continued to speak sarcastically. If it weren't for your mistake back then, the church wouldn't have had to hide from the public for hundreds of years and become a target of scorn by everyone. With your intelligence, you will only bring disaster to the church if you stay. If I were you, I would be too ashamed to show my face in public no matter what. You. Kironlo pointed at Han Shuor. He was so infuriated by Han Shuor's words that he couldn't even speak. I don't like people pointing at me. Why don't you try pointing at me again? Han Shuor shot a glance at the Pope of the Calamity Church. Seeing that the Pope did not open his mouth to stop Kironlo, Han Shuor understood that the Pope wanted to use Han Shuor to humiliate Kironlo. This made Han Shuor even more fearless. Junior, are you being too arrogant? Kironlo was flustered and exasperated. However, because he was wary of Han Shuor, he held back and did not dare to attack. Han Shuor narrowed his eyes, let out a cold shout, and shot towards Kironlo with a whoosh. His avatar of destruction suddenly unfolded the domain of divinity. In a split second, the entire Cardinal's Hall turned into a terrifying zone where the Edict of Destruction was in chaos. The elements that were originally everywhere suddenly vanished. These cardinals of the Calamity Church who cultivated in all kinds of elemental energies suddenly found themselves in a vacuum zone. They could no longer sense the familiar elemental energies. All of them panicked and looked at Han Shuor, who stood in the middle of the crowd. At this moment, Han Shuor was already standing in front of Kironlo. His fan-sized hand was clasped around Kironlo's neck. Han Shuor lifted Kironlo high into the air and stared coldly at the struggling Kironlo. The moment they disagreed, they immediately attacked, not caring about the occasion at all. This kind of straightforward style caused everyone to feel a chill in their hearts. They were all intimidated. Kironlo's face was flushed red like a clown. His bamboo-like legs were kicking in vain, while his hands were desperately holding onto Han Shuor's wrists, trying to free himself from this humiliating position. He cut an extremely sorry figure. However, he only possessed base god strength. After Han Shuor unfolded his domain of divinity, he could not use any elemental energy to attack Han Shuor. Without the elemental energy of death that he relied on to survive, he could only rely on the brute strength of his arms and legs to contend against Han Shuor's 9 changes realm physical body. He was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Even after exerting all of his strength, he still could not break free from Han Shuor's grip. Suspended in midair, breathing became more and more strenuous. His face was so red that it looked as though he was smeared with blood. Kironlo, the Grand Elder who had been revered by everyone in the Calamity Church for centuries, was being lifted into the air by Han Shuor by the neck. He was struggling like a clown without the slightest strength to resist. This scene scared the other cardinals who were on good terms with Kironlo and intended to rescue him from his predicament. Their eyes flickered with uncertainty. They did not dare to look at Kironlo, who looked as though he could choke to death at any moment. They lowered their heads timidly. In an instant, all elemental energy was rendered useless. This bizarre scene caused everyone to panic. Each and every one of them was stupefied as they stared at Han Shuor, who was coldly grabbing Kironlo. They felt their lips go dry and chills run down their backs. They felt as though their lives would be in danger at any moment. I have the capital to be arrogant, said Han Shuor arrogantly as he stared at Kironlo. This was also a reminder to everyone in the hall that they had better behave themselves. The high-ranking members of the Calamity Church wore terrified expressions and were at a loss of what to do. They were afraid that Han Shuor would vent his anger on them. In their minds, they were racking their brains for words to draw a clear line between themselves and Kironlo. The big fatty Pope was the only one who remained calm. However, he too was terrified. Unlike Kironlo, the Pope wasn't as arrogant as Kironlo. According to the rumors that Han Shuor had killed the Light Pope and several experts, as well as the fact that he had annihilated hundreds of thousands of orcs in the Empire of Orcs, The Pope could more or less guess Han Shuor's strength. However, even though he had a rough idea, he was still frightened when he saw Han Shuor restrain Caronlo in an instant, to the point that Caronlo didn't even have the strength to retaliate. If Han Shuor could restrain Caronlo so effortlessly, it meant that Han Shuor could also kill him effortlessly. This fact made the big fatty very uneasy. However, he didn't show it. Brian, we're all on the same side. Caronlo was just a little talkative. He doesn't deserve to die. Please let him go. The big fatty saw that Caronlo's face was getting redder and redder, and that he could breathe his last at any moment. He hastily stepped forward to mediate the situation. Wherever Han Shuor's cold and stern gaze fell upon, the many cardinals of the Calamity Church would timidly lower their heads, not daring to look him in the eye. Han Shuor nodded in satisfaction and said coldly, "I'll give you face today and spare his worthless life. However, that middle finger that's pointing at me must still be broken." Upon finishing those words, Caronlo's middle finger that was pointing at Han Shuor emitted a crisp snapping sound. Han Shuor casually tossed Caronlo into the air and fiercely slammed into the hard wall. Shortly after, Caronlo, who was finally able to breathe, let out a muffled groan, clutched his broken middle finger, and let out a blood-curdling screech. After doing all this, Han Shuor's body swayed and he flew back to his original seat, as though he had never moved at all. At the same time, the domain of divinity that enveloped the entire hall suddenly vanished. It was as though that terrifying oppressive feeling from before was just an illusion. You. After letting out a blood-curdling scream, Caronlo glared venomously at Han Shuor, but he dared not step forward for revenge. Han Shuor's performance just now was simply too terrifying. This made Caronlo realize that even if all the people in the hall were to join forces, they wouldn't be able to withstand a single minute from Han Shuor. It was only at this moment that he truly believed the six-horned tribal king's words. He finally understood why the cruel and merciless six-horned tribal king would be so well behaved in front of Han Shuor. "You don't even have the qualifications to seek revenge on me. You'd better give up on that thought. Otherwise, you'll be digging your own grave." Han Shuor looked at Caronlo arrogantly and ridiculed him disdainfully. Caronlo stared resentfully at Han Shuor without saying a word. This was the only way he could prove that he hadn't given in yet. However, his heart was overflowing with bitterness. He knew that he didn't even have the qualifications to seek revenge against such a powerful enemy. When Caronlo thought of this, his intestines turned green with regret. He sighed dejectedly and helplessly in his heart. All right, let's just forget about this matter. We're all on the same side. Let's not fight each other on the battlefield." The big fatty hastily mediated. He understood that after Han Shuor had caused such a ruckus, Han Shuor would no longer be able to find another noisy person in the entire Calamity Church. Han Shuor's path to becoming a member of the Calamity Church would be smooth and unimpeded. No one would oppose him. Even if there were any, they would keep it to themselves and never voice it out. "I'm giving you face, but you don't want it. Why bother?" The corners of Han Shuor's mouth curled into a sneer as he muttered to himself. However, everyone heard his muttering and smiled wryly without saying a word. They thought to themselves that Caronlo was truly unlucky to have run into such a malefic star. Sure enough, Han Shuor did not encounter any more resistance in the remaining matters. Every time the Pope brought up matters regarding Han Shuor, the elders, who had always been debating endlessly, were all of one mind today. Furthermore, they were all scrambling to express their support for Han Shuor, fearing that they would be slower than the others and incur Han Shuor's displeasure. The big fatty watched all of this and couldn't help but sigh with emotion. For so many years, every time he brought up a matter, those elders would always express their stance. Each of them would argue until their faces were red with anger. The only thing lacking was a fight on the spot. It was as chaotic as one could imagine. Who knew that the moment Han Shuor arrived, those elders would suddenly become one? Not only did they have the same stance, but they also expressed their stance faster than the other. Sure enough, brute force is sometimes the best weapon to settle all dispute. The Pope of the Calamity Church inwardly made up his mind. Despite his young age, Han Shuro had smoothly become an honorary elder of the Calamity Church and gained a position within the Calamity Church. All the Calamity Church's operations in Lancelot Empire and Brettel City could be handled by Han Shuro on his own. The Pope had also handed Han Shuro the information on all the members of the Calamity Church over there, as well as the distribution map of their forces. Wolf and Bert Zilli, the two members of the Calamity Church who were originally in charge of Lancelot Empire, had also become Han Shuro's direct subordinates. They would only listen to Han Shuro's orders. Apart from that, the Big Fatty had also informed Han Shuro of all the secret agreements between the Calamity Church and the various countries on Profound Continent, as well as the communication and transfer methods of their strongholds between countries, giving Han Shuro the authority to utilize this power. After assigning some miscellaneous matters, the Big Fatty brought up the main point of this meeting to Han Shuro. The altar would be opened in 5 days to worship the evil god they worshipped. At that time, Han Shuro must be present. The opening of the altar required some offerings and an appropriate timing. All of these were very particular. The Calamity Church had 5 days to prepare, and Han Shuro could also take a break. When the meeting concluded, the cardinals hastily walked out of the hall in fear and trepidation. It was only when they were far away from Han Shuro that they heaved a sigh of relief. Kironlo was one of them. However, that six-horned tribal king of the soul race had been indifferent all this time. Before leaving, he even took a glance at Han Shuro. It seemed that he was rather resentful about the energy stones. When only the Big Fatty Pope and Han Shuro were left in the hall, the Big Fatty suddenly burst into laughter. The fat on his face jiggled as he said in a straightforward manner, "Brian, you're really something. I've never seen that expression on Kironlo's face in all these years." How amusing. It was obvious that he was in a very good mood. Chapter 635. Inside the Cardinal's Hall, the plump Pope of the Calamity Church very sincerely consulted Han Shuro on some questions regarding the Edict of Destruction. Previously, he only knew that Han Shuro cultivated in necromancy magic and a peculiar martial technique, but he didn't know that Han Shuro had such high attainments in the Edict of Destruction. This time, Han Shuro deployed his domain of divinity of destruction in the Cardinal's Hall. The chaotic energy of destruction in the entire Cardinal's Hall had distorted the flow of normal elemental energies in space, rendering all the elders in the Cardinal's Hall powerless to borrow elemental energies. They were like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. While the plump Pope was in awe of Han Shuro, he also saw the hope of making a breakthrough in his strength. Han Shuro's avatar was a low god of destruction. His understanding of the Edict of Destruction was much deeper than the Pope's. The gap between base god and low god was an insurmountable chasm. After exchanging a few words with Han Shuro, the plump Pope immediately felt enlightened on some of his problems. This made him treat Han Shuro with even more respect. "Don't worry. I have no interest in the Calamity Church. I'm not going to be like that old fart Kironlo and criticize your actions. I'm here to communicate with the beings above me, not to seize the power in your hand." Han Shuro instructed Kironlo for a while. After thinking for a moment, he took advantage of the fact that there was no one around and expressed his stance. "I know that you are different from Kironlo. You have an unparalleled reputation in Lancelot Empire, but you have never had the intention to lay your hands on the throne. From this point alone, it can be seen that you are different from Kironlo. Therefore, I am very reassured about you." The plump Pope solemnly expressed his stance when Han Shuro brought up this matter. It appeared that he had long analyzed Han Shuro's character. "Haha, I'm a lazy person. I can't be bothered to manage all those messy affairs," Han Shuro shrugged and replied with a faint smile. The two did not continue the conversation. When the plump Pope saw that Han Shuro had expressed that he wouldn't fight for power with him, he suddenly relaxed. From Han Shuro's tone and attitude, he could tell that Han Shuro wasn't lying, unlike Kironlo who didn't mean what he said. The fat man put down his thoughts and sent Han Shuro out of the Doyen Hall with a smile on his face. There were still a few days before the ceremony to worship the evil god would begin. During these few days, Han Shuro stayed in the room that the Calamity Church had prepared for him, constantly dealing with the fawning of the cardinals. It was extremely annoying. It was also because Han Shuo's performance in the Doyen Hall was too shocking. Those doyens were all experienced people, so they naturally wanted to build a good relationship with Han Shuo as soon as possible, lest they accidentally offend Han Shuo and be killed by him. For the next few days, those doyens brought their subordinates with rare treasures that they had plundered over the years to pay their respects to Han Shuo. Each of them was more humble than the last, and each was more amiable than the last. As a result, Wolf and Bert Zilli, who had become Han Shuo's direct subordinates, also experienced a rise in status and identity. Now, wherever the two of them went, the people they met would wear expressions of envy and reverence. Even those bigwigs who didn't like them in the past suddenly became cordial, causing them to feel overwhelmed by the favor. Bert, now do you know how wise my decision was back then? Wolf had a complacent look on his face as he looked at the gifts piled up like a mountain on the table. He was extremely proud of his unique foresight. Because he was extremely annoyed and these gifts were useless, Han Shuo handed over the task of tidying up the gifts to Wolf and Bert Zilli. He also made it clear that if the two of them had something they liked, they could keep it for themselves without reporting to him. You fella, only your foresight is accurate. Haha, but this decision of following his lordship is the best decision you've ever made in your entire life, Bert Zilli said with a smile. His eyes narrowed into slits as he recalled that he had just obtained a top-grade summoning magic ring from these gifts. Wolf let out a mischievous laugh and said in a low voice, I heard that his lordship Brian nearly killed Great Elder Caronlo in the Senate. Ha, that old fart has always been high and mighty, interfering with the internal affairs of the church. I didn't expect that such a day would come. Really? Bert Zilli cried out in surprise and hurriedly asked, the Great Elder has great influence in the church and his own strength is extremely terrifying. Didn't he retaliate? Would he dare? It's not like you don't know how ruthless his lordship is. After a pause, Wolf sneered and said, I heard that the Great Elder didn't even have the strength to resist his lordship. He was restrained in an instant and couldn't move at all. If it wasn't for His Holiness the Pope personally pleading for leniency, his lordship Brian might have already killed that old fart. Even so, one of his fingers was broken. His lordship said that he was going to teach him a lesson. His lordship has such strength at such a young age and such a decisive way of doing things. His future is truly boundless, Bert Zilli exclaimed in admiration. That's right. Wolf laughed heartily. Soon after, he said complacently, we, who follow his lordship, will naturally obtain more status and power. The two looked at each other and laughed mischievously at the same time. They were extraordinarily proud of their correct foresight. ******. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. The Calamity Church's altar for the worship of the evil god was erected high in the center of the solemn and serene shrine. All the important figures of the church had arrived one after another to participate in the worship of the evil god. Han Shuo was personally brought to the shrine by the Pope of the Calamity Church. Along the way, all the young believers who had heard of Han Shuo's infamy didn't conceal the worship in their eyes and stared at Han Shuo. There were even some young and beautiful believers who stared at Han Shuo with their fiery eyes. They boldly threw flirtatious glances at him, wishing that they could take the initiative to throw themselves into Han Shuo's arms and lean on his broad chest to feel the manly aura of a peerless expert. The Calamity Church was different from the Church of Light. The Calamity Church was more casual when it came to the matters between men and women. The Calamity Church was also a religious organization that didn't have any scruples in doing things. Han Shuo's deeds over the years, under the deliberate promotion of the Pope and others, had practically become the code of conduct for the believers. Among the young believers, a ferocious trend of worshipping Han Shuo had fiercely blown up. It was more intense than anyone had imagined. When the fat Pope brought Han Shuo to the incomparably spacious shrine, after the crowd paid their respects to the Pope, one after another, they crazily shouted His Lordship Brian. Most of these people were youngsters and they were incomparably passionate. Hundreds answered his call. Those who knew of Han Shuo's glorious feats all responded to his call, cheering endlessly. The fat Pope was about to say a few words of courtesy, but before he could speak, he discovered that the shrine was filled with shouts of His Lordship Brian. His face was filled with embarrassment and he didn't know what to say for a moment. He understood that the reason why these believers were so passionate was because of Han Shuo's thunderous methods. First, he annihilated the Shrine of Ice, then he killed the Light Pope and the 2 demigods. Such deeds, under the publicity of the church, had left an extremely deep impression in their hearts. After all, from the moment they joined the church, they had been brainwashed to view the Church of Light as their greatest enemy in this life. The more they lived in the shadows and could not reveal their identities, the more they would realize that the Church of Light was the main culprit behind all of this. Naturally, they would hate Han Shuo even more. It went without saying what Han Shuo's annihilation of the 3 leaders of the Church of Light meant to them. Amidst the noisy cheers, the awkward-looking Pope of the Calamity Church forced a smile and said to Han Shuo, "I didn't expect that you would be so popular. You'd better say a few words to quell their enthusiasm." Han Shuo was also very embarrassed. He also didn't expect that he would usurp the limelight of the Fat Pope without doing anything. After thinking for a moment, Han Shuo slightly raised his 2 hands and made a shushing gesture. Han Shuo was a little over 190 centimeters tall. His imposing figure stood out from the crowd of disciples. Add to that the fact that everyone had been staring at him, everyone quickly quietened down when he made the gesture to keep quiet. It seemed that although Han Shuo wasn't a member of the Calamity Church, his deeds were simply too shocking and he had accumulated quite a bit of reputation within the church. After raising his hands for only a few seconds, the shrine full of people quietened down from the clamor of a market. Everyone looked at Han Shuo with excitement. They looked at this peerless demon who was said to have single-handedly annihilated more than 100,000 orcs, annihilated the Shrine of Ice, and killed the Light Pope. They waited for him to speak. "Yes, I am Brian. I have come this time to participate in this memorial service. After coming here, I realized that the church is different from what I imagined. This place is like a small city. Everything that should be here is here. It's very comfortable." The crowd laughed and continued to listen to Han Shuo's speech. "However, no matter how comfortable it is here, we are still in the underground world where we never see the light of day. It's just like the identity of us believers on the continent, we can never see the light of day." Han Shuo's tone changed as he shouted coldly. The crowd had complicated expressions on their faces, sighing incessantly. "I think it's time for us to come out of the underground world and walk before everyone in the open." Han Shuo looked around and remained silent for a while. Then, he suddenly shouted, "We should live in the outside world instead of hiding underground. We will kill anyone who dares to stand in our way. It won't be long before we can openly announce to everyone that we are believers of the Calamity Church. We will be respected by everyone. You will see it." Han Shuo shouted resolutely. As soon as Han Shuo finished speaking, the crowd was silent for a few seconds. Shortly after, they erupted into a frenzy like a volcano. Each and every one of them shouted the name Brian at the top of their lungs. "Brian, you are more suitable to be the leader than I am. I really couldn't tell that you are so good at stirring up people's heart." Beside Han Shuo, the big fatty looked at Han Shuo and said with a straight face. His words were indeed from the bottom of his heart. Seeing that Han Shuo could make those fanatical believers even more frenzied with just a few words, the big fatty could only sigh at his own inferiority. He believed that even if he had the same strength as Han Shuo, he wouldn't necessarily be able to have such a great influence. Han Shuo let out a hollow laugh, shrugged his shoulders, and didn't say much. Chapter 636. After Han Shuo's impassioned speech, the shrine was in an uproar for a period of time. It was only when the crowd gradually calmed down that the plump Pope announced the commencement of the ritual to pay homage to the evil god. Some living magical beasts were killed on the altar. Scarlet blood flowed into the blood pool at the center of the altar. All the cardinals of the Calamity Church respectfully kowtowed and silently chanted in the ancient language. Seeing that even the Pope had kowtowed, Han Shuo swept a glance at them. He bent his legs slightly and squatted down, but he did not kneel. At such a solemn moment, everyone was silently chanting according to the ritual. No one noticed Han Shuo's disrespect towards the god. Han Shoror coldly gazed at the altar at the center and observed the patterns on the magical matrix. As a low god, this kind of altar used to summon the evil god wasn't too different from the one Han Shoror had set up. Using some offerings and their devout faith, through the abstruse markings on the altar, the evil god worshipped by the Calamity Church from an unknown material plane far away could indeed hear the call from profound continent. As for whether those evil gods who heard the call would show themselves and be willing to communicate with them, that was another matter entirely. The ritual was carried out in an orderly manner under a solemn and respectful atmosphere. There were no incidents during the ritual. It wasn't until halfway through the ritual that a whirlpool suddenly appeared on the blood pool above the altar. A bizarre atmosphere gradually spread throughout the shrine. Han Shoror, who had been coldly sizing up the altar, suddenly creased his brows. His eyes were fixed on the transforming blood pool. He sensed that a god from an unknown distance was using some bizarre method to slowly inject his energy into the blood pool. The blood of the magical beasts in the blood pool gradually swirled faster and faster. A solemn and dignified atmosphere spread from the blood pool to the shrine. After an unknown amount of time, the blood in the blood pool gathered together and formed a bloodman whose features couldn't be discerned. A pair of eyes suddenly opened and landed directly on Han Shoror, who was squatting down and staring at him coldly. Being stared at by those eyes, Han Shoror actually felt powerless. It was as if the bloodman made of blood could take his life at any time. I am High God of Destruction, Teruk. I am in charge of the affairs of Profound Continent. The reason I have summoned you here today is to discuss with you the problems of Profound Continent, the bloody man said as he looked at Han Shoror. However, a voice sounded in Han Shoror's mind. Han Shoror was not surprised at all. He had already made preparations before coming here. When he heard the voice, his heart did not waver in the slightest and he did not speak. On a low-level material plane like the Profound Continent, it is very impressive that you could cultivate to low god realm. You cultivate in the energy of death and destruction. From the very beginning, you were destined to be on our side, the voice continued. You have offended the Shrine of Ice and the Church of Light. You have alarmed their higher-ups. They will not allow a god like you to exist on a low-level material plane like the Profound Continent. We can protect you and show you a new path. What do I need to do? Han Shoror, who had been silent all this time, finally opened his mouth and asked. Join us. Do some things on Profound Continent. We need you, and you need us. The bloody man said indifferently. Do you want me to increase the influence of the Calamity Church on Profound Continent to the greatest extent possible, so that all living beings on Profound Continent will worship you? Han Shoror asked. No. To Han Shoror's surprise, the voice said, if it is just for the power of faith to unify this continent, I won't make a personal appearance. A mere low-level material plane is not worth my effort. In addition, if you join us, you will become one of us. All the power of faith of all living beings on Profound Continent will be yours. Han Shoror was taken aback when he heard those words. He asked, if not for the power of faith of Profound Continent, then what is it for? What can I help you with? The population on Profound Continent is sparse. The power of faith isn't worth our fanfare at all. The reason why I called you here is to discuss something else with you. It's about the bottommost layer of the Profound Continent's underground world. The bottommost layer of the underground world. Han Shoror was startled yet again. Back when he was at the bottom of the Cemetery of Death, Han Shoror learned from the original owner of the skeletal staff that there was something strange about the bottommost layer of the underground world. He did not expect that this Calamity Church higher-up with high god strength would suddenly mention the bottommost layer of the underground world. What exactly was in the bottommost layer of the underground world? Why would the original owner of the skeletal staff mention it when the Shrine of Ice wanted to enter it, and why would this high god expert from who knows how many material planes away be thinking about it? What's there? Han Shoror asked. Some very strange things. As for what they are, don't ask for the time being. I summoned you this time because I need your help. You have the Cemetery of Death in your possession. There is a magical matrix inside that can be used for interplanar transportation. I want you to activate the interplanar transportation matrix and charge it with sufficient energy. In about half a month, someone from our side will come over and accompany you to the bottommost layer of the underground world. During this period of time, you must try to find a way to enter the third layer of the underground world and ensure that nothing goes wrong in the cemetery of death. If the interplanar transportation matrix is destroyed, we will have no way of entering and you will be doomed. Interplanar transportation was a two-way operation. If the interplanar transportation matrix on Han Shoror's side was not activated and he didn't have enough energy stones, even if he had the interplanar coordinates, gods from other material planes wouldn't be able to come over. Be careful during this period of time. Gods from other material planes may also use interplanar transportation matrices to enter your continent. Some of them may be your enemies, such as those from the Shrine of Ice and the Church of Light, the voice continued. How many interplanar transportation matrices are there on Profound Continent? Han Shoror creased his brows and asked. Other than the Cemetery of Death that you control, there is another one. Only the planar guardian of your continent can activate it. We were defeated in the last war and failed to occupy that interplanar transportation matrix. Fortunately, we left behind the Cemetery of Death as a backup. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be able to participate in this war. Upon hearing those words, Han Shoror suddenly recalled the Great War 5,000 years ago. The Calamity Church also had evil gods participating in that war, including the original owner of the skeletal staff, the ancestor of the soul race. But in the end, the Calamity Church suffered a crushing defeat and the evil gods fled from Profound Continent in a sorry state. The planar guardian of Profound Continent was the Primordius Dragon. He was Han Shoror's mortal enemy and should have been a member of the opposing faction back then. He would definitely send experts from the Church of Light or the Shrine of Ice to use the interplanar transportation matrix to come over. At that time, Han Shoror would have to face a truly powerful god. This was unavoidable. If I were to kill that planar guardian and destroy their interplanar transportation matrix before that, wouldn't it be difficult for them to enter the Cemetery of Death? Han Shoror asked. What you want to do may also be what the enemy wants to do. It's just that the interplanar transportation matrix isn't fixed. The Cemetery of Death can also be moved. Furthermore, there are special boundaries to prevent others from prying into it. It won't be easy for him to locate you, but it will be equally difficult for you to locate him. Under such special circumstances, I believe that the planar guardian will also carefully conceal himself and protect the interplanar transportation matrix, waiting for the arrival of his allies. I don't think you will be able to find him. Han Shoror was stunned by those words. After learning the secrets of the Cemetery of Death, Han Shoror knew that as long as he willed it, he could indeed move the Cemetery of Death as he pleased. In addition, the mysterious boundary surrounding the Cemetery of Death was indeed extraordinary. Back when Han Shoror hid in the Cemetery of Death, the six-horned tribal king of the soul race was unable to sense his soul. This meant that the Cemetery of Death really could prevent others from prying into it. Come to think of it, ever since Han Shoror returned to Profound Continent, carried out a bloodbath in Dragon Valley, and went on a killing spree all over Profound Continent, the Primordius Dragon had yet to find him. It appeared that it was just as the Primordius Dragon said, that it was temporarily hiding in an area where no one could pry into it, cautiously awaiting the arrival of its allies. Alright, as the energy of the offering is limited, this is all I can tell you. Remember, helping us at this time is the same as helping yourself. You have no other choice. As long as you handle the matters on Profound Continent well, I will not mistreat you. The voice of the bloody man in Han Shoror's mind gradually weakened. The rapidly spinning vortex in the blood pool also slowed down bit by bit. The sole conversation between Han Shoror and High God Terek took place in the middle of the ceremony. It was only after Han Shoror and Terek had finished their conversation that the entire ceremony came to an end. Inside the shrine, all the believers of the Calamity Church were still devoutly maintaining their posture of worship, praying in their hearts. But Han Shoror's heart was in turmoil. Through Terek's words, Han Shoror knew that there must be some enormous secrets hidden in the layers of the underground world. Otherwise, those gods from distant high-level material planes would never have come to a tiny, low-level material plane like Profound Continent. After learning of this fact, Han Shuor's heart was incomparably heavy. At present, Han Shuor only had the primordious dragon as his adversary on Profound Continent. But once those experts from alien material planes descended, Han Shuor's current strength would no longer be sufficient. The Shrine of Ice and the Church of Light, in particular, would definitely become his mortal enemies. On Profound Continent, Han Shuor might seem incomparably glorious. However, if he couldn't handle the upcoming matters, not only him, but all his loved ones in Lancelot Empire would have to pay an unimaginable price. Han Shuor took a deep breath. He knew that even if it wasn't for himself, he would have to pull himself together and play with those experts from alien material planes. This was a crisis, but wasn't it also an opportunity? Han Shuor thought resolutely to himself. Demonic cultivators always distinguished themselves in the midst of cruel slaughter, and this time was no exception. Chapter 637. The long memorial ceremony finally came to an end. The believers who had been kneeling on the ground all this time raised their heads and focused their gazes on Han Shuor in the middle of the crowd. These people couldn't hear the conversation between Han Shuor and the High God, but the unusual atmosphere inside the shrine made them realize that something must have happened inside the shrine. The Pope too turned his gaze to Han Shuor with inquiring eyes. Han Shuor knew what the Pope wanted to ask. He nodded, indicating that he had indeed communicated with the evil god but didn't tell the Pope the truth. Han Shuor more or less had some understanding of some of the wills of the evil gods of the Calamity Church. It was just that he was, after all, a base god and couldn't enter the eyes of those true gods. Therefore, the Pope naturally wouldn't tell Han Shuor too much about such matters. There was a watershed between base god and low god. It meant that the distance between a mortal and a god wasn't far, but it was very difficult to cross. No matter how powerful a base god was, against a low god, even the weakest of low gods, the only thing that awaited them was death. In the eyes of true gods, base gods weren't existences who could speak to them face to face. A base god who didn't possess divine energy, divine soul, or a domain of divinity was but an ant in the eyes of true gods. It was as simple as that. Han Shuor didn't explain anything to the big fatty, nor did he ask any questions. As the Pope of the Calamity Church, he was well aware of some taboos among the gods. He knew not to ask what he shouldn't ask and not to know what he shouldn't know. That was why he was able to sit in his current position. Now that the ceremony was over, under the orders of the few elders, the Pope of the Calamity Church who were gathered here dispersed one after another. However, those who participated in the memorial ceremony could tell from the unusual atmosphere inside the shrine and Han Shuor's behavior that the evil god they worshipped must have communicated with Han Shuor alone. This made them feel even more reverence for Han Shuor. Those who used to be close to Caronlo, after the communication between the god and Han Shuor, had completely understood the situation and straightforwardly drew a line between themselves and Caronlo, fearing that Caronlo's existence would affect their relationship with Han Shuor. After communicating with the High God, Han Shuor didn't linger in the Calamity Church any longer. After communicating with the big fatty, Han Shuor left the headquarters of the Calamity Church. Han Shuor had to walk through a long desert when he arrived. But when he left, he arrived at the secret stronghold of the Calamity Church in Lancelot Empire through a magical transportation matrix. His status in the Calamity Church was no longer the same. Naturally, his treatment was different as well. Wolf and Bert Zilli, who had arrived at the Calamity Church's headquarters with Han Shuor, had always been in charge of such matters. Now, however, they were directly responsible for Han Shuor. The largest secret stronghold of the Calamity Church in Lancelot Empire was located in the Kurlan Gorge near the Valley of Sunshine. The Kurlan Gorge, Tanai, was situated between a group of low peaks. Mist pervaded the air and the environment was intricate and complicated. After exiting the transportation matrix, Han Shuor gave Wolf and Bert Zilli a few instructions and left the gorge. Han Shuor returned to the Cemetery of Death. The 3 spirit demons that were being refined at the center of the Cemetery of Death had reached the final stage. Han Shuor observed for a while to ensure that there were no problems before he walked into the large-scale interplanar transportation matrix at the center of the Cemetery of Death. Having learned all the secrets of the Cemetery of Death, Han Shao knew how to activate and use this large-scale interplanar transportation matrix. To ensure that nothing went wrong, Han Shao once again inspected this large-scale interplanar transportation matrix and replenished it with enough energy to maintain interplanar transportation. Only then did he truly feel at ease. On the way back, Han Shao carefully pondered over the High God of Destruction's words. He knew that he had no choice. If the Primordius Dragon were to receive experts from another material plane and learn of the tragedy that happened in Tanai, then not only would he have to face the Primordius Dragon, but he might also have to face even more powerful high-level gods. Han Shao was confident, but he wasn't conceited. He understood that with his current strength, he would undoubtedly emerge victorious against experts of the same realm. However, if the person who came was stronger than him, not to mention a mid-god, even a late-stage low-god might be able to kill him. Therefore, Han Shao knew that he had no choice and no way out. All he could do was to team up with the Calamity Church and work hard for this unknown battle. He could only win and not lose. After such a conversation, the arrogant and domineering Han Shao's mood became much heavier. Only by becoming stronger, so strong that no one could threaten him, would he be able to protect himself. Only then would he have the absolute right to speak among experts. After contemplating for a long while, Han Shao told himself that he urgently wanted to take another step forward in his strength. Among the 3 souls that could rapidly improve his strength were his Avatar of Death and his main body. His Avatar of Death could use the last piece of divine essence of death he obtained from the void to improve his strength. His main body could use the 9 transformations of the 9 transformations of demonic arts to speed up the process of comprehension. Only his Avatar of Destruction, as it was formed by the fusion of the Origin Crystal of Destruction and the Demon Slayer Edge's divine energy and the Demon Slayer Dadara's divine energy, had never made any progress in the Edict of Destruction. It was truly not easy for it to improve further. Han Shao didn't feel discouraged. He allowed his Avatar of Death to digest the 3rd piece of divine essence of death while his main body painstakingly studied the application methods of the 9 transformations of the 9 transformations realm. Time passed by quickly. Han Shao stayed in the Cemetery of Death like a fool. All 3 of his avatars had sunk into silence. All 3 of them were fossilized without the slightest aura of life. One day, while Han Shao was meditating in the Cemetery of Death, he suddenly sensed that there were living beings approaching from outside the Cemetery of Death. All 3 souls were jolted awake from their meditations. Han Shao was greatly startled and hastily spread out his consciousness to probe the situation outside the Cemetery of Death. The conversation he had with High God Terek at the Calamity Church made Han Shao realize that his situation wasn't as safe as he had imagined. According to Terek, the Primordius Dragon might be welcoming the arrival of his allies ahead of time. This also meant that once the Primordius Dragon discovered his location, Han Shao would very likely be in grave danger. Especially since the Cemetery of Death was located in the Dark Forest, not far from the Dragon Valley where the Primordius Dragon resided. It was only natural that Han Shao would be so worried. Han Shao heaved a sigh of relief after he circulated his consciousness. The aura of the approaching person was weak. It was obvious that he wasn't an ancient existence on the same level as the Primordius Dragon. Han Shao's Avatar of Destruction, the most leisurely, stood up and walked outside. After walking out of the Cemetery of Death, the faces of Emily, Phoebe, and Fanny entered Han Shao's sight. Emily and Fanny had rather calm expressions, but Phoebe, who had quarreled with Han Shao some time ago, seemed rather uneasy. "Brian, I knew you would be here." Emily smiled sweetly. She went over to hold Phoebe's lily-white hand and walked towards Han Shao. She said smilingly, "Let bygones be bygones. Phoebe has already thought things through. You don't have to throw a tantrum anymore." It appeared that after Han Shao's disappearance for a long time, Phoebe had given in under the persuasion of Emily and Fanny. Perhaps she thought that the reason why Han Shao had disappeared for so long was because he blamed her for being rude and selfish. After hearing Emily's words, Phoebe looked at Han Shao with a complicated expression. Tears seemed to be welling up in her eyes. She bit her lower lip and said hatefully, "I've been gone for such a long time. Why didn't you comfort me?" Hanshaw actually felt guilty after hearing her words. After thinking about it carefully, he realized that he was the one in the wrong. It was only because Phoebe's attitude wasn't good that he lost control of his temper for a moment. Now that Phoebe was weeping, she was like a completely different person from her usual cold and stubborn self. Her pitiful appearance made Hanshaw's heart ache. The trip to the Calamity Church made Hanshaw realize the crisis he was in. He felt as though he could lose his life at any moment. His mood wasn't as relaxed as it used to be. After hearing Phoebe's words, Hanshaw's mood became even heavier. He forced a smile and went over to wipe away the tears at the corner of Phoebe's eyes. He said, "I was indeed a bit too much that day. Let bygones be bygones. Don't think too much about it. Boo-hoo." After hearing Hanshaw's gentleness, Phoebe couldn't hold back the sourness in her heart. She broke into sobs, as though she wanted to vent all the grievances she had suffered over the past few days through her tears. She cried harder and harder. Emily and Fanny had indeed developed a very good relationship with Phoebe over the past few years. As soon as they saw her crying, they hastily came over and comforted her with kind words. Their expressions were frantic, but their attitudes were sincere. Hanshaw was rather flustered. He hastily tried every possible way to console Phoebe. After a long while, when Phoebe was tired of crying on his chest, she finally stopped. At this moment, Hanshaw sighed softly and thought of the unknown dangers ahead. He couldn't help but say in a low voice, "You guys hurry back in a bit. Don't come here until I tell you. It's too dangerous here during this period of time. What's wrong?" Fanny was startled. Soon after, she laughed and said, "Brian, are you not welcoming us to your secret place? Ha, although the profound continent is vast, who can hurt you? You must not welcome us to say such words, right?" It was obvious that Fanny thought that Hanshaw was joking with her. She simply didn't believe that there was anyone on the profound continent who could hurt him. Emily and Phoebe were the same. They thought that Hanshaw didn't like them disturbing him and were panting with anger. These three women had always been blindly confident in Hanshaw and couldn't tell the situation at all. This made Hanshaw not know whether he should be proud or laugh bitterly. However, this wasn't the time for jokes. Therefore, Hanshaw put on a straight face and solemnly said, "I'm not joking with you. The profound continent is so vast. There are indeed people who can threaten me." "Who?" "We don't believe it." Fanny giggled and asked, not the least bit nervous. Hanshaw couldn't help but laugh bitterly in his heart. Just as he was about to reply, his expression suddenly changed. He sighed and said in a heavy voice, "He's here." An ancient dragon's breath gushed forth without the slightest concealment. It was obvious that the primordious dragon had fallen into a violent rage. It was charging straight at the boundary of the cemetery of death with unstoppable force. Looking at the three women who were at a loss, Hanshaw knew that the primordious dragon must have found his way here through these three women. Chapter 638. Stay here and don't go anywhere. Hanshaw's expression was grave as he yelled at the three women. "Brian, what's going on?" Emily asked hastily. She could tell that Hanshaw wasn't joking. Hanshaw's expression was unprecedentedly tense. She understood that something big must have happened. "I don't have time to explain to you. Remember, stay inside and don't go anywhere," Hanshaw hastily instructed and dashed out according to his perception of the dragon's breath. As soon as this avatar flew out, his avatar of death and his main body also woke up from their cultivation. They turned into two faint shadows and disappeared in a flash. "What's going on? What's going on?" Phoebe asked in a panic. "He's definitely in big trouble. With his current strength, someone who can make him treat so seriously is definitely not someone we can provoke. Let's do as he says and stay inside. Don't be a burden to him." At this critical moment, Emily, who had experienced all sorts of major events, calmly said to the other two girls, "Emily, we've just arrived and his enemy has already come knocking on our door. Could it be us?" Fanny wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. She had a bitter expression on her face. "Perhaps. Forget it. Now is not the time to blame ourselves. If there's someone to blame, it's me. I shouldn't have brought you all here to look for him. Emily sighed. Her delicate face was full of regret. She had said that it was not the time to blame herself, but she had started to blame herself first. It's not your fault. It's all because of me that this situation has happened. Phoebe also took the blame on herself. All right. Let's not talk about this anymore. Let's go inside and wait patiently. I believe that Brian will definitely be able to get out of this predicament safely. There won't be any problems. Emily forced a smile and pulled the other two women into the center of the cemetery of death. As soon as they walked out of the boundary, Hanshoro saw the primordious dragon carrying a terrifying dragon's breath, his enormous body destroying towering trees as he charged towards them. The primordious dragon unfolded his domain of divinity of earth. Rich element of earth frantically gathered on his enormous body, forming a thick earth armor. This made his already enormous body even more exaggerated. Hanshoro unfurled his consciousness and clearly detected the primordious dragon's path. Seeing that the dragon was about to crash into the boundary of the cemetery of death, with one thought, Hanshoro's two avatars suddenly appeared on either side of him. His avatar of destruction transformed into the Demon Slayer Edge and shot straight at the primordious dragon, leaving a trail of scarlet blood radiance behind it. Hanshoro's avatar of death mobilized the elemental energy of death and activated it with the divine energy in his body. In front of the boundary of the cemetery of death, an enormous white bone shield was formed. The white bone shield looked like a huge cloud that covered the sky. Under the sunlight, it reflected a sparkling and translucent bone light. The Demon Slayer Edge shot towards the primordious dragon at lightning speed. Its target was the primordious dragon's lantern-sized eyes. However, before the Demon Slayer Edge could approach the eyes, the primordious dragon breathed out dragon's breath. The dragon's breath condensed the element of earth in his domain of divinity and formed a 10-meter-long earth dragon. The earth dragon ferociously collided with the Demon Slayer Edge, dispersing the Demon Slayer Edge's attack aimed at his dragon eyes. The Demon Slayer Edge was unable to stop the second attack in time. The enormous body of the primordious dragon fiercely collided with the enormous white bone shield deployed by his avatar of death. An earth-shattering explosion erupted in this place. The enormous bone shield formed from the element of death and divine energy could not withstand such a ferocious attack. Bone fragments suddenly shot out and filled the sky. Hanshoro let out a muffled groan. His avatar of death's face turned pale. After a violent collision, the primordious dragon shattered the enormous bone shield formed by Hanshoro's avatar of death. Its body paused for a moment before it once again pressed down on the boundary that enveloped the cemetery of death. Hanshoro, who was only 1.9 meters tall, suddenly grew to a giant of 30 meters. Before the primordious dragon could press down on him, his hill-sized palms abruptly caught the primordious dragon's enormous body. The demonic yuan in his body frantically circulated and combined with his insane physical strength, he suddenly flung the primordious dragon into the distance with all his might. The primordious dragon's body, which was tens of meters long, was actually sent flying backwards by Hanshoro's ferocious throw. It crashed into the ground 200 meters away with a loud bang. The impact shattered the mountain rocks, the earth trembled, sand and pebbles were sent flying. Dozens of ancient trees of various sizes were all snapped. Hanshoro first used his avatar of destruction to force the primordious dragon to spit out dragon breath as it charged towards him. Then, he used the bone shield to block the swift and violent attack. Taking advantage of the moment when the primordious dragon paused, Hanshoro's main body erupted with energy and his avatar hurled the primordious dragon far away. This series of actions happened in the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint. All three of Hanshoro's bodies attacked at the same time, precisely grasping every opportunity to block the primordious dragon's terrifying charge and prevent the primordious dragon from destroying the boundary over the cemetery of death. In just a few short seconds, Hanshoro felt as though he had just gone through a great battle. He felt that he had consumed an enormous amount of energy. The primordious dragon was indeed worthy of being the guardian of profound continent for thousands of years. Just a single ferocious charge had forced all three of Han Shuo's bodies to exert all their strength. The primordious dragon was indeed his last opponent on Profound Continent. Huff, huff. After throwing the primordious dragon, Han Shuo panted heavily. His enormous body quickly returned to normal. With a single leap, he arrived at the area where the primordious dragon was. At this moment, the primordious dragon had coiled up from the ground. He raised his head high above the ground and looked around furiously. Han Shuo did not act blindly without thinking. After that attack, Han Shuo knew that the layer of earth armor covering the primordious dragon's body possessed an extremely perverse defensive power. Up until now, Han Shuo could not be certain that the primordious dragon was not alone. Therefore, he dared not act blindly without thinking. "It's you. Are you the one who massacred my Dragon Valley?" The enraged primordious dragon suddenly roared when he saw Han Shuo cautiously approaching. He appeared to be extremely furious. "That's right. A dozen or so great dragons in Dragon Valley died by my hand." Compared to the primordious dragon's rage, Han Shuo was unbelievably calm. He nodded and admitted with a gloomy face. The primordious dragon was even more enraged when he heard Han Shuo's frank admission. "You deserve to die. The Church of Light was right. You are the source of chaos on Profound Continent. I should have killed you without mercy back then, instead of just imprisoning you in the abyss. You brought this upon yourself. Back then, I helped you resist the invasion of abyssal creatures out of goodwill. Not only were you ungrateful, you even severed the exit while I was in the space-time discontinuum, causing me to stay in the abyss realm for 5 whole years. I nearly lost my chance to return to Profound Continent. I massacred your Dragon Valley all because of you. All your descendants died because of you." Han Shuo callously mentioned the reason why the primordious dragon still had the face to talk about this matter. "Sophistry. My clansmen died because of you. You must pay with your life." The primordious dragon seemed unwilling to talk any further. He twisted his neck and his enormous body was about to make another big move. "Are you alone?" Han Shuo asked one last question before the primordious dragon made his move. While conversing with the primordious dragon, Han Shuo's consciousness was constantly scanning the surroundings. However, he did not discover the presence of any other experts. However, Han Shuo wasn't sure because if the intruder's realm was higher than his, the intruder's soul might have the power to isolate his consciousness from prying. Therefore, Han Shuo wasn't sure if his consciousness could detect the soul of an expert stronger than him. After that blow, Han Shuo could more or less ascertain that the primordious dragon had yet to attain late-stage low-god realm. Given the primordious dragon's current realm, Han Shuo didn't have absolute confidence in defeating him. However, he believed that with his 3 souls, he wouldn't be any weaker than the primordious dragon. However, if the intruder wasn't just the primordious dragon, Han Shuo would have no chance of winning. All he could do was return to the cemetery of death immediately and flee as far as he could with the 3 ladies. "So what if I'm alone? I'm more than enough to kill you." The primordious dragon stared blankly for a moment after hearing Han Shuo's sudden question. Soon after, as though he felt humiliated, he roared again, "Despicable human, don't think that we, the race of dragons, are as despicable and shameless as you. Oh, it seems that those experts from alien material planes have yet to descend." Han Shuo nodded and muttered to himself as though he didn't hear the primordious dragon's roar. "Back then, I showed you mercy and spared your life. Today, I will not repeat the same mistake. By killing you and destroying the cemetery of death, those evil gods will find it difficult to descend. Profound Continent will regain its peace. You are the greatest factor of instability on this continent. Today, you must die." It seemed that the primordious dragon was aware of the identity Han Shuo played in the Calamity Church. As the masters of 2 interplanar transportation matrices on Profound Continent, the 2 of them were destined to be mortal enemies. "The fact that you didn't kill me the last time was the biggest mistake of your life. Because today, it is already an extravagant hope for you to kill me," Han Shuo sneered. From the moment he learned that the primordious dragon had come alone, Han Shuo felt at ease. Just now, he had tested the primordious dragon's strength and found that it was indeed very strong. However, Han Shuro had confidence in himself. He did not think that he was inferior to the primordious dragon. Han Shuro's words provoked a burst of wild laughter from the primordious dragon. Amidst the laughter, the primordious dragon's enormous body suddenly stopped in midair, blocking the sun's radiance. Its shadow shrouded Han Shuro beneath it. All of a sudden, the ground beneath Han Shuro's feet began to rumble and quake. The magnitude of the quake was very great, and the ground suddenly undulated like the waves of the sea. A frightening force suddenly blasted towards Han Shuro through the earth. The thick surface of the ground set off waves, as if to bury Han Shuro within. Once he was buried, Han Shuro knew that the primordious dragon would have ways to use the energy of the earth to bombard him. Therefore, as soon as he felt the earth quiver, Han Shuro immediately soared into the sky. Taking advantage of the fact that the wave-like earth had yet to cover him, he had already flown high into the sky. "After killing you, I will be the new guardian of Profound Continent," said Han Shuro as he stood proudly in the air with the primordious dragon. Then, his body gradually turned blurry until not even a trace of his aura could be sensed. He then vanished. However, the primordious dragon suddenly stopped roaring and strangely quietened down. He could sense that Han Shuro was in the vicinity because an intense threat had locked onto him. Chapter 639. This potential danger made the primordious dragon rather uncomfortable. He stopped roaring and suddenly quietened down. Although he appeared to be very disdainful of Han Shuro on the surface, after that strike just now, he realized that Han Shuro indeed possessed the strength to contend against him. In particular, the fact that Han Shuro could simultaneously cultivate in the energy of death and destruction made him even more apprehensive. Right before his eyes, Han Shuro suddenly and bizarrely vanished without a trace. He couldn't even detect the slightest trace of Han Shuro's aura. Such a bizarre situation made the primordious dragon pay more attention. After observing the surroundings for a while, he still couldn't sense Han Shuro's location. However, that indescribable energy that shrouded his soul never disappeared. He understood that Han Shuro was somewhere, ready to launch a thunderous strike. The lantern-sized dragon eyes sparkled with a brilliant radiance. The primordious dragon kept silent for a moment, as though he felt that it would be very difficult to defend himself with such an enormous body. Therefore, in the afterglow of the scorching sun, the primordious dragon's body gradually shrunk. In just a few short seconds, the hill-sized primordious dragon had shrunk to a little over 170 centimeters tall. He had a benevolent-looking face and was looking around vigilantly. "Come out," the primordious dragon coldly groaned as he surveyed the surroundings after transforming into an old man. There was no response. The surroundings were deathly silent. Only his voice reverberated and lingered for a long time. After waiting for a while, seeing that Han Shuro was still lurking in the dark, the primordious dragon grew impatient. He pondered for a moment, then suddenly stomped on the ground and walked towards the Cemetery of Death. The Cemetery of Death was only 1,000 meters away from his current position. With his extremely fast speed, he closed the distance between himself and the Cemetery of Death in the blink of an eye. There was an interplanar transportation matrix inside the Cemetery of Death that could connect to other planes of existence. As long as that interplanar transportation matrix was destroyed, the evil god worshipped by the Calamity Church would not be able to descend upon Profound Continent. With Han Shuro's measly low-god strength, when the experts from the Shrine of Ice and the Church of Light arrived, he would be doomed. Therefore, the Cemetery of Death was the key to the future battles of the Profound Continent. He believed that Han Shuro would definitely attack him before he reached the Cemetery of Death. His judgment was correct. Not only did the Cemetery of Death have a teleportation array that could connect to another plane, but there were also 3 women who were deeply in love with Han Shuro. Therefore, Han Shuro, who had been waiting for the best opportunity to strike, had no choice but to attack in advance. All of a sudden, hundreds of streaks of blood-red light interweaved into a rolling spiky ball that looked like a hedgehog. It shot out from the shadow of a towering tree as if it had a mind of its own. It shot towards the primordious dragon that was walking towards the Cemetery of Death step by step. At the same time, Rows of bone spears flew out of thin air and neatly lined up in front of the primordial dragon as they shot towards him. H. What's the use of such an attack? The primordial dragon, who had transformed into an elderly man, coldly groaned. He did not seem to make any movements, but the dense element of earth gathered and formed a solid and thick wall of earth in front of him. All the bone spears that shot towards him were intercepted. Not a single one of them was able to break through the wall and land in front of him. It was the blood ball that was brimming with spikes that broke through the wall of earth erected by the primordial dragon and shot towards the primordial dragon with astonishing momentum. The primordial dragon was rather astonished. He sized up the blood ball with an odd look before he suddenly opened his mouth and spat out a stream of dragon breath at the blood ball that was flying towards him. The blood ball that was flying in a straight line was extremely intelligent. As soon as the primordial dragon spat out his dragon breath, it suddenly changed direction and turned into a strange curve. It was impossible to predict its trajectory. In fact, the primordial dragon wasn't astonished by the attack power of the blood ball. What he was astonished by was that the energy on the blood ball did not belong to the well-known 12 fundamental energies. When the primordial dragon saw that the blood ball was intelligent enough to change its trajectory after he spat out his dragon breath, he was even more astonished. He did not dare to underestimate Han Shuo anymore. All of a sudden, dark clouds loomed over the clear sky. Bloody light flashed like lightning from within the thick dark clouds. An evil and gloomy aura was vaguely released from the dark clouds above, exerting an intense pressure on everyone. Boom! There was a muffled explosion in the air. The dark clouds that were pressing down actually condensed rapidly, forming a huge black curtain that directly shrouded the area below. In an instant, the entire area was plunged into darkness where one couldn't even see their fingers if they stretched out their hands. The primordial dragon was taken aback. He raised his head and looked at the abnormal sky. He could not tell what kind of energy Han Shuo had unleashed from the dark clouds that loomed over the sky. He sensed the abnormality of the element of death, the sudden change in the nomological law of destruction, and the existence of an unknown but extremely ruthless evil energy. The three types of energy merged together and manifested in the form of dark clouds. The terrifying energy contained within seemed to be able to destroy the world. Even the primordial dragon felt an extreme sense of danger. Seeing the dark clouds looming over the sky, the primordial dragon knew that he could not hesitate. He planted both feet on the ground and channeled the divine energy of earth into the depths of the earth. Under the effect of the domain of divinity, a terrifying earthquake seemed to suddenly occur beneath his feet. Amidst the earth-shaking rumbles, the earth tore into bottomless gullies. Hills rose from the ground and charged towards the dark clouds above. For a moment, the sky collapsed and the earth cracked. Sand and pebbles flew everywhere. The entire area seemed to have become hell on earth. The violent collision between the two of them created an incomparably terrifying sound. The originally verdant and lush vegetation and the flat earth were like an enraged beast that had gone berserk. The dark clouds looming over the sky resembled the face of a weeping ghost. Streaks of bloody light shot down like blood-colored lightning. The ruthless energy carried with it an obsession to destroy all things. It was extremely overbearing. The primordial dragon, who had transformed into an amiable old man, suddenly roared in fury. The earth trembled slightly as he activated some unknown energy. He forcibly changed the trajectory of an unknown meteorite in the sky. The meteorite came crashing down at a speed 10 times faster than before, dragging a streak of red light that was hundreds of meters long behind it. The meteorite was extremely fast and ferocious. It arrived in the blink of an eye and violently smashed into the dark clouds. The thick dark clouds were smashed deep into the earth, creating a deep pit that was hundreds of meters wide. Sparks flew in all directions from the pit. Broken ancient trees that towered into the sky were set ablaze. The boundary that enveloped the cemetery of death, which was only 1,000 meters away from this area, also strangely distorted for a moment, neutralizing the aftermath of the terrifying attack. The dark clouds that should have been floating in the sky were suddenly smashed deep into the earth. Moreover, they did not disperse and were even twisting rapidly like a living demon. "You're dead." The primordial dragon, who had transformed into an old man, suddenly let out a cold snort and shot towards the dark clouds. The moment the meteorite smashed the dark clouds deep into the earth, the primordial dragon, who had been unable to detect Han Shuo's aura, suddenly sensed Han Shuo's aura from within the dark clouds. He was overjoyed. The primordial dragon was ready to deal a fatal blow to Han Shuo. In the blink of an eye, he arrived at the dark clouds. Midway, he suddenly transformed into a dragon and swooped down at the dark clouds. He seemed to want to use brute force to tear the dark clouds apart, pull out the concealed Han Shuo, and tear him to pieces. "Haha, let's see where you can run to this time." The primordial dragon's enormous body suddenly pressed down on the dark clouds, his enormous claws viciously tearing at the dark clouds. "I have no intention of running." Han Shuo's callous voice really did come from within the dense dark clouds. The primordial dragon laughed maniacally, his laughter shaking the heavens and the earth. It was as though he could already see the scene of Han Shuo being torn to pieces. He first blasted the dense dark clouds with earth-shattering mounds. Then, he used his divine energy to forcibly change the direction of a meteor and ruthlessly bombarded the dark clouds. He was confident that Han Shuo would definitely be severely injured by these two waves of attacks. The primordial dragon was once again enraged at the thought of the dozen or so giant dragon remains in the Dragon Valley. Furthermore, Han Shuo's existence was a threat to his transcendent position on this continent, especially since Han Shuo had the cemetery of death in his grasp. With all these factors combined, the primordial dragon absolutely would not allow Han Shuo to survive today. In his excitement, the primordial dragon did not notice that Han Shuo's callous voice was still as calm and unhurried as ever. Just as his dragon claws pierced into the enormous dark clouds like giant anchors and frantically tore at them, the dark clouds suddenly sparkled with strange multicolored lights. Soon after, an extremely frightening energy erupted from the dark clouds and engulfed the primordial dragon's enormous body amidst the terrifying sound waves. Amidst a series of loud explosions, the soul piercers shot into the primordial dragon's soul. Emerald green flames surged out from the dark clouds and engulfed the primordial dragon in an instant. The primordial dragon's abnormally strong earth armor seemed to be unable to withstand the burning of the emerald green flames. Amidst popping sounds, the armor became dry and cracked. All the remaining pearls of annihilation, as well as the cyan demon blaze shuttles refined from various rare materials in the Abyss realm, were hidden in the dark clouds by Han Shuo. As the primordial dragon recklessly tore at them, these demonic treasures that Han Shuo had meticulously refined burst out and engulfed the primordial dragon. The dark clouds that were so thick that they could not disperse also dissipated at this moment. After the dark clouds dispersed, the blood seether flew out and abruptly enveloped the primordial dragon's enormous head. The thick smell of blood assailed everyone's nostrils. Sinister and mournful ghost faces were faintly discernible from within the blood seether. They shrieked noiselessly and struggled to break out. It was an extremely terrifying sight to behold. Having suffered so many chaotic attacks on its body and soul, the primordial dragon was struck dumb. All kinds of pain swarmed over him, causing him to suddenly let out a blood-curdling screech. The sound waves spread far and wide. All the demonic beasts within 100 kilometers of the primordial dragon fled as far as they could when they heard it. Chapter 640. As the protector of Profound Continent, the might of the primordial dragon was irresistible to all living beings on this continent. All the magical beasts in the dark forest instinctively felt fear when they heard the primordial dragon's miserable howls. They hurriedly distanced themselves from the area where the howls came from. Although the explosions of the pearls of annihilation could not blast through the earth armor formed on the primordial dragon's body, the soul piercers shot out from the pearls of annihilation could penetrate soul attacks. That earth armor with astonishing physical defense could not withstand the soul piercer's attack on the soul. The green flames formed by the cyan demon blaze shuttle could burn the flesh and soul through flesh. It was a demonic artifact even more vicious than the soul piercers. Similarly, the blood seether did not just attack the physical body. When it shrouded the primordial dragon, the blood flow in his body began to turn abnormal, as though his blood vessels were about to burst. Han-Shoror had hidden the 3 demonic treasures in the dark clouds. Seizing the opportunity, Han-Shoror unleashed them all at once. All of them landed on the primordious dragon's body, causing him tremendous damage and suffering. Demonic arts and demonic artifacts were methods of attack that did not belong to this universe. It was the first time that the primordious dragon had encountered such bizarre attacks. When the earth armor was rendered useless, and both his soul and body were under constant attack, the primordious dragon panicked and howled in pain. "I told you, I have no intention of running." When the dark clouds dispersed, the 3 Han-Shorors appeared. Under the bombardment of the primordious dragon's earth armor and the meteors, all 3 of them were covered in cuts and bruises. They looked extremely miserable. At this moment, the primordious dragon did not pay any attention to what Han-Shoror had to say. He continued to howl and howl. The earth armor covering his enormous dragon body cracked and fell off under the scorching green flames. His body was charred black. His avatar of destruction transformed into the Demon Slayer Edge and suddenly landed on the palm of Han-Shoror's main body. Carrying the Demon Slayer Edge, Han-Shoror unhurriedly flew towards the frenzied primordious dragon. His avatar of death, on the other hand, hovered in the air, secretly mustering divine energy to prepare for the next wave of attack. Under the 3 great demonic treasures, the primordious dragon's soul and body were under constant attack. Under such circumstances, the primordious dragon was at its weakest to resist Han-Shoror. Han-Shoror took advantage of this opportunity to deal the primordious dragon a devastating blow. However, as a mid-stage low god, the primordious dragon was indeed much stronger than the 4 demon kings that Han-Shoror encountered in the void. Even when faced with the corrosion of the energy of the 3 demonic treasures, the primordious dragon still stood firm. The divine energy and divine soul in its body did not fail to organize a counterattack. The transformation took place in an instant. Just as the Demon Slayer Edge in Han-Shoror's hand was about to pierce into the primordious dragon's neck, Han-Shoror's consciousness sensed that the primordious dragon's divine soul and divine body suddenly formed a miraculous contract. The domain of divinity of earth that had been shrouding the primordious dragon all along also underwent a sudden transformation. In Han-Shoror's eyes, the enormous body of the primordious dragon was rapidly petrifying at a speed visible to the naked eye. The petrification process was so fast that in the time that Han-Shoror was stunned, the primordious dragon's mountain-like body was completely petrified. A thick layer of rock covered his entire body. In the blink of an eye, the element of earth was sucked dry. The element of earth filled every cell and every piece of flesh on his body, helping him complete the petrification process. After petrifying, the primordious dragon's divine energy still flowed unimpeded through his body. His divine soul was still as resilient as ever. This made Han-Shoror realize that although the primordious dragon had been petrified, his consciousness still existed. The Jade Flame Shuttle and Blood Seether possessed an intense destructive power against the flesh and blood. However, after the primordious dragon's body was petrified, his flesh and blood were filled with a large amount of element of earth, changing their original state. The destructive power of the Jade Flame Shuttle and Blood Seether was no longer effective. On the other hand, as the soul piercers only targeted the soul, even though the primordious dragon had been petrified and had avoided the Jade Flame Shuttle and Blood Seether's attack, Han-Shoror still had to go all out to eliminate the soul attack of the soul piercers. If the primordious dragon were to suddenly make such a move, Han-Shoror believed that the primordious dragon, who had guarded Profound Continent for so many years, would perish today under the attack of the 3 demonic treasures and the incisive thrust of the Demon Slayer Edge. However, some things just weren't that flawless. Just as Han-Shoror was about to end the battle with a single strike, he did not expect the primordious dragon to suddenly petrify. In the blink of an eye, he was no longer affected by the Jade Flame Shuttle and Blood Seether, and was even using all his might to eliminate the soul piercer's attack on his soul. Everything happened so quickly that Han-Shoror did not even have the time to unleash his final attack. Seeing that the primordious dragon had completed the petrification process, Han-Shoror knew that he had to deliver a fatal blow before the primordious dragon completely eliminated the soul piercer's attack. Of the 8 major elemental energies, the energy of earth was renowned for its sturdy defense. The fact that the Primordius dragon chose to petrify at such a critical moment was sufficient proof of his confidence in his petrified state. Otherwise, he would never have dared to do so. Without much hesitation, Hanshor raised the Demon Slayer Edge in his hand and imbued all his demonic yuan into the Demon Slayer Edge. Combined with the chaotic energy of destruction within the Demon Slayer Edge, the Primordius dragon drew a jet-black streak of light from the sky and directly bombarded the petrified Primordius dragon's back. The reason why the attack landed on the Primordius dragon's back and not his head was that before he was petrified, the Primordius dragon had buried his head, the part of his body that was most capable of killing him, deep within his body. He was prepared to use other parts of his body to withstand Hanshor's frenzied attack and did not give Hanshor the opportunity to directly attack his head. This petrifying weapon that had absorbed the negative energy of tens of thousands of living beings, under the full force of Hanshor's demonic arts, could absolutely be called an invincible divine weapon. When the Demon Slayer Edge landed on the Primordius dragon's stony back, sparks flew from the Primordius dragon's back. The Demon Slayer Edge did not disappoint Hanshor. Petrification, one of the ultimate forms of the element of earth, was said to have the strongest defense. It possessed a terrifying defense comparable to the hardest rock. However, even in this state of petrification, the Demon Slayer Edge was still able to penetrate half of the Primordius dragon's back amidst the sparks flying in all directions. When the Demon Slayer Edge pierced into the Primordius dragon's petrified body, Hanshor's consciousness keenly sensed the Primordius dragon's soul shudder. This made Hanshor understand that although the Primordius dragon had been petrified, this kind of injury would still cause him pain. Shocked, Hanshor tightly gripped the hilt of the Demon Slayer Edge with both hands and pulled with all his might. Clang! The Demon Slayer Edge bounced out from a crack in the rock. Seeing that this kind of injury was effective, Hanshor did not hesitate and soared into the air in the same way. Shortly after, he poured all his energy into the Demon Slayer Edge and launched another attack. This time, he accurately struck the Primordius dragon's wound. This time, the Demon Slayer Edge, along with the hilt, sank into the Primordius dragon's body. Hanshor clearly felt that his soul, which was using all its strength to purge the corrosive energy of the soul piercers, trembled even more violently. Sneering coldly in his heart, Hanshor executed the same method. He soared into the air again and bombarded the Primordius dragon's body with all his might, creating deep wounds on the Primordius dragon's body. The Primordius dragon looked like an enormous rock, but its surface was covered with cracks and looked extremely terrifying. Perhaps it was because of Hanshor's continuous attacks, the Primordius dragon took even longer to purge the soul piercers than the abyssal demon kings who had been struck by the soul piercers. Moreover, the Primordius dragon's soul trembled repeatedly and was in unspeakable pain. Hanshor did not utter a word. He only callously repeated the same action. He soared into the air, dove down, and struck again and again. He only struck 3 times at every wound, ensuring that the Demon Slayer Edge would penetrate deep into the Primordius dragon's body. This kind of attack continued for more than 30 times. Other than the Primordius dragon's head, Hanshor used this method to leave deep wounds on the Primordius dragon's body. This was a serious blow to the Primordius dragon's body. Finally, the energy of the soul piercers in the Primordius dragon's soul was completely purged by him. An earth-shattering dragon roar came from the Primordius dragon's head that was buried deep in the Primordius dragon's body. Following this roar, the Primordius dragon's petrified body began to change at an even faster speed. In the blink of an eye, the Primordius dragon's body became charred black and covered in wounds. Hanshor's attack came down again from the sky. This time, because the Primordius dragon's head had come out of the Primordius dragon's body, Hanshor changed his target midway. With a callous expression on his face, he bombarded the Primordius dragon's head. He was attempting to thoroughly kill the Primordius dragon with this one attack. Roar! The Primordius dragon roared angrily at the sky. An anchor-like dragon claw shot out at lightning speed, blocking Hanshor's fatal attack. Shortly after, the Primordius dragon roared crazily. Just when Hanshor thought that the Primordius dragon would lose his mind and counterattack, the Primordius dragon abruptly swung his tail and fled in the direction of Kossi Empire. On the Primordius dragon's back, There were many ghastly wounds, from which blood flowed profusely. The primordius dragon's enormous body was badly mutilated, charred and rotten flesh everywhere. It seemed that his injuries were extremely serious. It appeared that although the primordius dragon's body was petrified, the wounds caused by Han Shoror's repeated bombardment of the Demon Slayer edge would still exist even after the petrification was lifted. There were more than a dozen deep wounds, each one penetrating deep into the primordius dragon's body. Han Shoror knew that the primordius dragon must have suffered extremely serious injuries. Otherwise, there was no way that the primordius dragon would not stay and fight to the death with Han Shoror after suffering such a great loss, but would instead flee from this place at all costs. Han Shoror let out a light breath and coldly watched as the primordius dragon transformed back into his human form and disappeared. He did not get up to give chase, but instead rested on the spot for a while. Even though the primordius dragon was injured, his speed was still extremely fast. However, Han Shoror believed that as long as he pursued with all his might, he would definitely be able to catch up to the primordius dragon. However, at this point in time, Han Shoror was also exhausted and needed to rest. Otherwise, even if he caught up to the primordius dragon, he might not be able to kill him. Besides, Han Shoror had an even better idea at this moment. Therefore, he did not take advantage of this opportunity to pursue the primordius dragon for thousands of miles. Chapter 641. The battle had ended. Apart from the Cemetery of Death, which remained unscathed due to the protection of the boundary, all the surrounding plants within a 5-kilometer radius had been burned to the ground. The ground was full of craters and flames rose from all directions. After resting for a while, Han Shoror stood up. His two avatars returned to his main body. Han Shoror also returned to the Cemetery of Death. The three women were all inside the Cemetery of Death. Each and every one of them had worried expressions on their faces. As soon as they saw Han Shoror come in, they immediately welcomed him and asked all at once, "How are you? Are you all right? Are you hurt?" The three women had sensed the terrifying commotion outside the Cemetery of Death just now. At that moment, the three women had the illusion that doomsday had arrived. Each and every one of them was flustered, afraid that something might have happened to Han Shoror. Han Shoror walked into the Cemetery of Death. His clothes were tattered, and his face was covered with dust from the battle. His entire body looked exhausted. It was obvious that he had gone through a bitter battle. This made the three women even more nervous. Seeing the three women's flustered appearance, Han Shoror smiled and said in a gentle voice, "Don't worry, I'm fine. Brian, it's all my fault. I shouldn't have come looking for you. If I didn't come, your enemy wouldn't have known where you were." Emily hurriedly blamed herself when she heard Han Shoror's words. "It has nothing to do with you. This matter is all because of me. If I wasn't in a hurry to find him, you definitely wouldn't have come looking for him." Phoebe rushed to take responsibility for herself. Her heart was full of regret. Seeing that the two women were blaming themselves, Han Shoror said, all right. I'm fine now, aren't I? Brian, who did you fight with just now? Is there anyone on this continent that can make you so nervous?" Fanny appeared to be very surprised. She inquired about Han Shoror's opponent. Fanny had always believed in Han Shoror's extraordinary strength. Especially when she knew that Han Shoror had godlike strength, she was even more surprised by Han Shoror's opponent. Han Shoror didn't know whether to laugh or cry at Fanny's blind trust. He explained in a deep voice, "On the profound continent, there has always been a protector since ancient times. My existence has seriously threatened the position of that protector. Therefore, he would disregard everything to get rid of me. That guy is extremely powerful. This time, he only retreated with serious injuries because I schemed against him. There are many middle planes in the universe, and there are countless experts in high-grade planes. Don't think that I'm invincible. With my current realm, I'm afraid I can only retreat when facing experts from other planes." The three ladies were startled by Han Shoror's words. Before today, the three ladies truly believed that Han Shoror was invincible. But when they saw that Han Shoror was being so serious, They understood that what Han Shaw said should be true. Then, will you be in any danger? Emily asked worriedly after keeping silent for a moment. There will always be danger. But I have ways to avoid it. You don't have to worry about that, Han Shaw comforted the three ladies. After thinking for a moment, he sternly said, but the three of you, don't look for me for the time being, and leave this place at once. The protector of the plane considers himself merciful and benevolent. He shouldn't make things difficult for you. As long as you don't look for me, it won't be easy for them to figure out where I am. Understood. The three ladies replied in unison. Shortly after, Fanny paused and asked puzzledly, but, haven't you already been exposed? It doesn't matter. After I send you away, this place will change. After this matter is settled, I will look for you on my own. You don't have to worry about me. In addition, after you return, communicate with Lawrence and tell him not to rush to attack other countries for the time being. Otherwise, you might anger some people. Han Shaw instructed. All right, then we won't disturb you any further. Emily nodded understandingly and said to Fanny and Phoebe, my two sisters, shall we leave this place for the time being? Fanny and Phoebe were people who knew when to stop. After hearing Emily's words, although they were reluctant, they still followed Emily's instructions and allowed Han Shaw to escort them out of the Cemetery of Death. As soon as they left the Cemetery of Death, they discovered that the area within a radius of 10 miles was a complete mess. Everywhere they looked was a scene of desolation and flames were burning everywhere. It was not hard to imagine just how intense the battle had been. After comforting the three ladies for a while, they tactfully left together. The three ladies possessed rather decent strength on Profound Continent. They left very quickly and disappeared from Han Shaw's sight in the blink of an eye. After seeing the three ladies off, Han Shaw immediately returned to the Cemetery of Death. When he arrived at the hall where the interplanar transportation matrix was located, Han Shaw closed his eyes and recalled the information he had about the Cemetery of Death. Then, he opened his eyes and walked to the lowest level of the Cemetery of Death. He found a magical disc and filled it with magical crystals. He then transformed his avatar of death into a skeletal staff and placed it into a gap at the center of the disc. As soon as the skeletal staff entered the disc, Han Shaw's avatar of death seemed to form a miraculous connection with the Cemetery of Death. Dense elemental energy of death instantly converged into the Cemetery of Death from all directions and attached itself to the boundary that enveloped the Cemetery of Death. As more and more energy gathered, the elemental energy within the Cemetery of Death grew denser and denser. If one were to look at the Cemetery of Death from afar, one would discover that the Cemetery of Death, which was originally indistinguishable to the naked eye, had now transformed into an enormous sphere that emitted a faint green halo. It appeared extremely bizarre and mysterious. The element of death converged on the Cemetery of Death and the boundary that enveloped it. The earth rumbled and shook. The Cemetery of Death that was buried deep underground also started to rumble and tremble. With the replenishment of energy, the Cemetery of Death slowly rose from the ground. Finally, the enormous green sphere suddenly flew high into the sky. The element of death converged within the Cemetery of Death from all directions. Han Shaw, who had formed a miraculous connection with the Cemetery of Death, used his consciousness to control the Cemetery of Death to rise high into the sky. After identifying a direction, he rapidly flew into the clouds. The Cemetery of Death was located high up in the clouds. The faint green radiance on its surface appeared even dimmer and colorless as Han Shaw flew. Separated by such a great distance, it would be impossible for anyone to detect the abnormal changes in the sky. The boundary that enveloped the Cemetery of Death could also block the soul senses of experts. Therefore, Han Shaw believed that no one would be able to detect his flight. After identifying a direction, Han Shaw controlled the Cemetery of Death and flew straight towards it. Using the magical equipment on the Cemetery of Death, Han Shaw could see the scene below from high up in the sky. After flying at full speed for a day, Han Shaw and the Cemetery of Death arrived at the boundless ocean in the west of Profound Continent. The boundless sea was a great ocean in the extreme west of Profound Continent. Legend had it that it was the end of the sky. It was boundless and uninhabited, and only sea creatures could survive. After flying for a while longer in the boundless sea, Han Shao discovered a barren island of various sizes below. He had arrived at the extreme depths of the boundless sea. Seeing an island in the shape of a gourd, Han Shao unfolded his consciousness and discovered that there were only a few weak wild beasts on the island. He then controlled the cemetery of death and slowly descended from the dark clouds high up in the sky. Amidst the rumbling, the cemetery of death was like a meteor crashing into the earth. It landed in a dense forest and was buried deep underground, just like the dark forest. The boundary still shrouded the cemetery of death. No human or beast would be able to detect the cemetery of death. When the cemetery of death soared into the sky above the dark forest, Han Shao deliberately invoked a mystical art to bring along the piece of land used to refine spirit demons. When the cemetery of death landed here, the formation used to refine spirit demons was still in perfect condition. It was still providing a steady stream of energy to the 3 spirit demons. Walking out from the cemetery of death, Han Shao summoned the Earth Elite Zombie and Wood Elite Zombie. With the 2 working together, the dense forest that had been riddled with potholes due to the cemetery of death's landing was rapidly restored to its original state. The broken tree branches were also reconnected. Standing proudly in the air, Han Shao gazed into the distance. What entered his eyes was the dark blue sky and the boundless azure ocean. The sky and the sea were one. The warm sea breeze blew and the waves lapped against the coarse, rugged, ancient rocks. Some seabirds and sea beasts were resting comfortably in the crevices of the rocks, quietly bathing in the sunlight. They appeared to be extremely content. Naturally growing on the gourd-shaped island were some large wild fruits. They were bright red and green and could be found everywhere. Just by gazing at the boundless ocean, Han Shao felt his mind open up and a heroic spirit soared into the sky. The magnificent scenery of the gourd-shaped island also put him in a good mood. He thought to himself that if Emily and the other 2 girls were to come here in the future, they would surely fall in love with everything here. Being in a good mood, Han Shao unfolded his consciousness. With the gourd-shaped island as the center, he extended his consciousness to its surroundings. He wanted to see if there were any interesting neighbors in the vicinity. At the 9 Changes realm, Han Shao's consciousness could cover an extremely vast area. When he calmed his heart and did so, the area that his consciousness could cover grew larger and larger. The fishes and shrimps in the ocean, all kinds of marine magical beasts, many flying seabirds, and other auras of marine life fell into Han Shao's consciousness. After his consciousness covered several dozen miles, Han Shao suddenly sensed a rather strong soul. That soul sensed Han Shao's prying and retaliated aggressively. It transmitted an unfriendly message to Han Shao: "Get out of my territory. This ocean belongs to me. Leave at once, or you'll be dead." Han Shao let out a soft cry of surprise and found it rather funny. Using his consciousness, Han Shao knew that the soul did not belong to a human being. Given Han Shao's mastery of souls, he was certain that the creature's strength was on par with Pegasus. On Profound Continent, it would be considered a super expert. However, in Han Shao's eyes, it was nothing more than a clown. How dare it be so arrogant? An expert of this level might have never encountered an expert on Profound Continent like Han Shao. Therefore, it must feel that it was invincible and arrogant to send a soul message. Han Shao, however, paid no attention to it. He continued to expand his consciousness and extended it further. Han Shao's consciousness tightened and he let out a soft cry. Han Shao's consciousness was suddenly obstructed by an isolated island. It seemed that there was a boundary that prevented his consciousness from prying. This made him extremely curious. Chapter 642. The mystery beneath the island had attracted Han Shao's attention. However, Han Shao did not head to that area to investigate. On one hand, Han Shao had important matters to attend to. On the other hand, he had yet to fully recover his strength. He did not want to waste any time at this critical juncture. Contrary to Han Shao's expectations, when that formidable marine creature that his consciousness had just encountered, seeing that Han Shao did not show any fear and was still staying in the sea, actually approached Han Shao from the island he was occupying, the creature howled in rage. A creature of that level of strength could indeed be considered extremely powerful on profound continent. However, Han Shoror did not take it to heart. Han Shoror had important matters to attend to and therefore had no time to pay attention to the creature. He walked straight back to the Cemetery of Death. Although the location of the Cemetery of Death had undergone tremendous changes, the interior was still the same. The enormous interplanar transportation matrix at the center of the Cemetery of Death was just as capable of short-distance teleportation. Using the interplanar transportation matrix, Han Shoror returned to the depths of the City Lord's mansion in Brettel City. Shortly after, he teleported to the southern border from the transportation matrix in Brettel City. From there, he flew towards the Empire of Orcs. During the battle in the Dark Forest, Han Shoror had gravely injured the Primordius dragon, leaving behind a trail of blood and flesh on the ground. Using secret demonic arts, Han Shoror was able to determine the Primordius dragon's location through the blood and flesh left behind by the Primordius dragon. At this critical juncture, the Primordius dragon had been gravely injured and must have returned to the safest and most secretive place to recuperate. In Han Shoror's opinion, the Primordius dragon must have returned to the area where the interplanar transportation matrix was located. The interplanar transportation matrix was the key. If Han Shoror could locate the Primordius dragon's location and destroy the interplanar transportation matrix, it would be difficult for the Church of Light and Calamity Church to enter Profound Continent. In that case, his side would no longer have any obstructions in the battle of the underground world. It was with this in mind that Han Shoror did not pursue the Primordius dragon while he was escaping, nor did he follow him. He knew that the Primordius dragon would have been extremely vigilant and Han Shoror was not confident that he could hide without being discovered by the Primordius dragon while he was injured. Through the blood and flesh of the Primordius dragon and the secret demonic arts, Han Shoror determined that the Primordius dragon was in the barren land inhabited by orcs. Using the convenient transportation matrix in Lancelot Empire, Han Shoror arrived at the southern border and entered the Empire of Orcs from there. Han Shoror, who had attained the Nine Changes realm, could transform his physical body at will. As soon as he entered the interior of the Empire of Orcs, he transformed into an ordinary orc and took some of the more remote paths towards the depths of the Empire of Orcs. The Orc Empire was indeed barren. Along the way, all they could see was dry land and sparse yellow plants. Lush greenery was rarely seen. The earth here was an earthy yellow color, as if it was not suitable for the growth of crops. The weather was extremely hot, and there was no rain all year round. Even the plants that managed to survive would eventually wither. It was no wonder that the orcs had always coveted the fertile land of Lancelot Empire. They would travel thousands of miles to invade whenever possible. It seemed that the land they lived on was just too barren. As he walked deeper into the Empire of Orcs, Han Shoror only took some time to observe the land. He did not explore too deeply. After half a day, Han Shoror passed through the Empire of Orcs and arrived at an even more desolate yellow plain. This place was slightly better than the desert. There were no plants here, only some ferocious magical beasts that lived in packs. They roamed all over the plain as if waiting for a lone traveler. This plain was extremely vast. It took Han Shoror a lot of effort to cross it. After passing through the plain, Han Shoror suddenly arrived at a mountain range. He could feel the aura of vitality. Magical beasts roamed the mountain range. It was currently drizzling. The ground was muddy and difficult to walk on. Grey swamps were everywhere. It was completely different from the scenery he had seen in the Empire of Orcs. The environment here was somewhat similar to the Dark Forest. However, there was too much rainwater. It seemed that all the rainwater that the Empire of Orcs lacked all year round had been gathered here. Along the way, he could see pools of water that were neither deep nor shallow. Many of the magical beasts were extremely powerful. The cruel law of the jungle was played out to the extreme. Han Shoror did not know that he would arrive at such a peculiar place after passing through the Empire of Orcs and a vast plain. The Primordius dragon's location just so happened to be in this region. As soon as he arrived, Han Shoror slowed down and concealed the aura of life on his body. He cautiously walked towards the Primordius dragon's location, fearing that he would attract his attention. After walking for a while and avoiding many powerful magical beasts along the way, Han Shao slowly arrived at the location his consciousness had sensed. In the grey drizzle, a disorderly forest with tangled vines entered Han Shao's eyes. As soon as Han Shao walked into this place, he discovered that the element of earth here was much richer than in other places. He was certain that the primordious dragon was nearby. Han Shao flew in the air. His feet did not touch the ground. He was afraid that the primordious dragon, who cultivated in the element of earth, would detect his arrival through the earth. Han Shao approached with extreme caution. He did not even push aside the vines that blocked his way. He would rather take a detour and go deeper. After walking like this for about 10 minutes, Han Shao suddenly stopped. Han Shao sensed the existence of a boundary in front of him. The person who had set up the boundary must have cultivated in the element of water. Han Shao could feel the softness of the boundary, as well as traces of cold air. Not in a hurry to break the boundary, Han Shao stopped. He spread out his consciousness and carefully observed the movements inside the boundary. The boundary itself had the ability to prevent the soul from sensing it. However, Han Shao had left a mark on the primordious dragon's body beforehand. Using the mark on the primordious dragon's body, Han Shao's consciousness resonated with the mark. This allowed him to avoid the obstruction of the water element boundary and sense the aura of the living creature inside. The reason why he was so cautious was because he was worried that other experts from other planes had already arrived besides the primordious dragon. As long as one of the experts from other planes arrived first, Han Shao would be consigned to eternal damnation if he entered rashly. Just in case, Han Shao had no choice but to be cautious. Using the mark he left on the primordious dragon's body, Han Shao's consciousness gradually spread out inside the boundary. Han Shao could sense that the primordious dragon should be hiding under the boundary. His soul was calm and serene, as though he had fallen into a deep sleep. It seemed that the primordious dragon was using this method to recover from the heavy injuries on his body and soul. After carefully exploring every area inside the boundary, Han Shao was pleasantly surprised to find that there were no traces of other souls apart from the primordious dragon within the boundary. This made Han Shao feel much more at ease. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but curve into a cruel, cold smile. As long as he could seize this opportunity to break through the boundary, find the interplanar transportation matrix inside, destroy it, and kill the primordious dragon, Han Shao would at least be at peace for a good period of time. He wouldn't have to worry about the arrival of hostile experts from other planes. Han Shao calmed down and adjusted his body and consciousness to the optimal state. His avatar transformed into the Demon Slayer Edge and landed on Han Shao's palm. Once his avatar transformed into the peerless weapon known as the Demon Slayer Edge, the ruthless energy on the Demon Slayer Edge was bound to leak wildly. In order to delay the primordious dragon's detection, Han Shao had no choice but to double the time. He first used demonic arts to form a protective membrane on the Demon Slayer Edge, temporarily concealing the ruthless aura on the Demon Slayer Edge. The demonic yuan in his body frantically poured into the Demon Slayer Edge, merging with the violent and chaotic negative energy within the Demon Slayer Edge. He seemed to hear the shrill cries of tens of thousands of souls. Evil light burst out, ready to tear apart that layer of protective membrane at any time. As more and more energy gathered, when Han Shao sensed that the protective membrane had reached its limit, the shrill cries of tens of thousands of souls sounded from within the Demon Slayer Edge. Ruthless evil energy shot out from the edge of the Demon Slayer Edge. A beam of cold demonic light streaked across the sky and bombarded the boundary deployed by the water god. Han Shao had already sensed that the energy contained in this boundary was not weak. Therefore, Han Shao did not conceal his strength at all in this attack. Instead, he unleashed all of his strength in an instant. Poof! Under the violent energy of the Demon Slayer Edge, the water boundary abruptly tore apart. A 2-meter long and half-meter wide crack suddenly appeared in front of Han Shao. With a sway of his body, Han Shao passed through the crack at lightning speed and entered the center of the boundary. As soon as he entered the boundary, Han Shao immediately sensed the extremely dense yuan energy of Earth. The yuan energy of Earth here was much denser than the yuan energy of Earth in the dark forest where the cemetery of death was located. This caused Han Shuo to stare blankly. He immediately realized that there must be a place of extreme Earth within this boundary that was even more ancient than the place in the dark forest. After becoming a god, Han Shuo learned that the yuan energy of Earth and Fire in the 5 places of extreme elements were somewhat different from the elements of Earth and Fire that experts in this world could directly absorb. Based on Han Shuo's current insight, the yuan energy of Earth and Fire nurtured in the 5 places of extreme elements were in the form of the elements of Earth and Fire after they were several dozen times denser. Because of the special existence of places of extreme Earth and extreme Fire, the Earth and Fire elements inside would be more concentrated, and then become the Earth and Fire elemental energy with more spiritual energy. After being concentrated, these elemental energies were not quite the same as the elements, but there was no difference in the composition of the power. Instead, the energy contained was more and more concentrated. Back then, it was because the Lord of the Flames had occupied a place of extreme fire that he was able to quickly cultivate to become the Emperor of the Flames. It was because he had mastered the method to absorb the yuan energy of fire formed from the concentrated element of fire. As the protector of profound continent, since the primordial dragon had occupied such an ancient place of extreme Earth, he must have learned the method to absorb the yuan energy of Earth. It was no wonder that he would immediately flee back to this place without a care for anything else. A series of thoughts flashed through Han Shuo's mind. Han Shuo knew that he had to kill the primordial dragon as soon as possible. Otherwise, the speed at which he recovered from his injuries would be much faster than he had imagined. Therefore, after pausing for a moment upon entering the boundary, Han Shuo immediately pounced towards the primordial dragon. Chapter 643. The place of extreme Earth, which took tens of thousands of years to form, was right beneath Han Shuo's feet. The enormous body of the primordial dragon was buried deep in the place of extreme Earth. At the center of the boundary was an enormous hexagram magical matrix. At the center of the hexagram was a crack in the earth. Han Shuo dove into the crack at lightning speed. 100 meters deep, he immediately saw the primordial dragon entrenched in the place of extreme Earth. The enormous yuan energy of Earth in the place of extreme Earth converged into the primordial dragon's body from all directions, filling his body with a faint earthy yellow halo. Inside the primordial dragon's head was a source of energy that absorbed the yuan energy of Earth. The thick yuan energy of Earth within it was very obvious. The primordial dragon knew of Han Shuo's arrival the moment Han Shuo tore open the water boundary. However, in order to better absorb the rich yuan energy of Earth in the place of extreme Earth, the primordial dragon had entered a dormant state. In order to awaken from this state, he needed some time. Although he tried his best to awaken from his dormant state, it still took him a few seconds. In those few seconds, Han Shuo had arrived in front of him. Without hesitation or a word of nonsense, as soon as Han Shuo saw the primordial dragon, he launched a torrential barrage of attacks at the primordial dragon that had yet to fully awaken. Han Shuo's avatar of death suddenly split from his main body. The 3 trump card boundaries of weakness, fear, and aging were successfully formed in the blink of an eye and enveloped the primordial dragon's enormous body. Using divine energy, the element of death to form Death Reset bloomed beneath the primordial dragon's body like a beautiful flower. Death Reset was an attack that Han Shuo mastered through the divine soul of that mid-god after he truly entered the divine realm. Under the effect of Death Reset, the opponent's body would rapidly decay and the element of death would rapidly occupy the enemy's body, causing rapid destruction to the body. Death's shift was like a beautiful man-eating flower. After it bloomed beneath the primordial dragon, the evil energy instantly poured into the primordial dragon's body. In an instant, the primordial dragon's body that came into contact with the power of death's withering emitted thick green smoke and a pungent stench. Wielding the demon slayer edge that his avatar had transformed into, Han Shuo's main body slashed down at the primordial dragon's head. The demon slayer edge emitted a ferocious howl of vile spirits and dazzling blood-red light. The demon slayer edge unleashed a power that could destroy the heavens and the earth. The ruthless and evil power was mixed with the negative energy of 10,000 souls and had a strong deterrent effect on the soul. Even the Primordius Dragon's powerful will was affected by this attack and was almost unable to muster any strength to counterattack. Raw, under the effects of the three great boundaries of the necromancy element and the corrosive power of death and wither, the Primordius Dragon was in so much pain that it couldn't help but let out a shrill cry. Under the effects of the three boundaries, the Primordius Dragon, who was already gravely injured, had both the strength of his body and soul greatly weakened. On top of that, the death fade was continuously rotting his body that had yet to recover. At this moment, the Primordius Dragon was struck by all kinds of pain. Even the Primordius Dragon was somewhat unable to endure it. After letting out a howl of pain, the Primordius Dragon's head swayed back and forth. His divine soul suddenly exerted force. A strange object that converged the yuan energy of Earth began to frantically absorb the yuan energy of Earth from the place of extreme Earth. The energy gathered on his head, causing his head to look as though it had suddenly crystallized. Clang! Sparks flew in all directions as the sword slashed down. It was as though the sword had struck the hardest iron and stone in the world. It did not leave a single crack. Roar! The Primordius Dragon once again howled in rage. His head buzzed from the strike. He was dizzy and had a splitting headache. Han Shoror's expression changed and he was greatly alarmed when his sword failed to sever the Primordius Dragon's head. He suddenly realized that the Primordius Dragon must have long since obtained the Earth Soul Orb of the Earth attribute in the place of extreme Earth. His soul and the Earth Soul Orb must have fused together. The strange object in his soul that was absorbing the yuan energy of Earth must be the Earth Soul Orb. Using the Earth Soul Orb, the Primordius Dragon's physical defense would reach its peak in the place of extreme Earth. It would definitely not be an easy task to destroy the Primordius Dragon's body with a physical attack. This thought rapidly flashed through Han Shoror's mind. He immediately gave up on the idea of using the sharpness of the Demon Slayer edge to directly shatter the Primordius Dragon's body. The Demon Slayer edge suddenly became motionless in the void. The evil and negative energy formed from the devouring of tens of thousands of living beings within the Demon Slayer edge abruptly condensed into an enormous, malevolent ghost face. Dripping with blood, the ghost face bared its fangs and brandished its claws. It pounced at the Primordius Dragon's soul in its incorporeal form. His avatar of death also gave up on using the energy of death to attack Han Shoror's body. Instead, he concentrated all his energy and used the soul rend that Han Shoror had yet to master to entangle the Primordius Dragon's soul slam. Similar to Death's Wither, Soul Rend was a divine-grade attack that Han Shoror had only recently mastered. Soul Rend could be viewed as a sublimated version of Soul Tremor. It used divine energy to gather one's own soul energy, entangle the opponent's soul, and grind and sever the opponent's soul bit by bit. Han Shoror's main body did not remain idle either. He gave up on all physical attacks and instead locked his consciousness on the Primordius Dragon's soul. A vortex was formed in the depths of his soul, generating an extremely violent suction force that made every movement of the Primordius Dragon's soul extremely difficult. Inside the place of extreme Earth, the Primordius Dragon, who was already a mid-stage low god, could borrow the energy of the place of extreme Earth to form an extremely monstrous physical defense. If the Primordius Dragon were to face a low god of other elements who did not know how to attack the soul, he would undoubtedly be able to firmly defend his body and even defeat a god of a slightly higher level than him. However, all three of Han Shoror's bodies knew how to attack the soul. Even his avatar of destruction, which should not be able to attack the soul, could directly attack the soul because it was formed from the Demon Slayer edge. Due to the negative energy from the deaths of tens of thousands of living beings, the avatar of destruction could attack the soul directly. The three bodies simultaneously gave up on attacking Han Shoror's physical body and joined forces to attack the Primordius Dragon's soul. The Primordius Dragon's wishful thinking immediately fell through and he fell into a bitter struggle. Han Shoror was determined to end the Primordius Dragon right there and then. He unreservedly unleashed all the energy of his soul. The vortex formed by his main body's consciousness entangled the Primordius Dragon's soul, making it difficult for him to move. The negative energy formed by the Demon Slayer edge shrouded his soul, making it impossible for him to escape. Meanwhile, Han Shuro's avatar of Death's Soul Shredder seized the opportunity to tear and mince his soul. Under the joint attack of the three bodies, the Primordius Dragon, whose soul had already been seriously injured by the soul piercers, finally couldn't withstand the attack. No matter how strong his physical defenses were, they couldn't protect his soul. Under the combined attack of the souls of Han Shuro's three bodies, the ancient planar protector of Profound Continent finally lost the energy of his soul bit by bit. Han Shuro dared not let his guard down. He firmly entangled the Primordius Dragon's soul and increased the intensity of his soul attacks to the maximum. Gradually, the Primordius Dragon's divine soul grew weaker and weaker. His aura also grew weaker and weaker. Sensing that the Primordius Dragon's divine soul was slowly losing consciousness, Han Shuro's consciousness tightened. His marvelous consciousness attacked the consciousness that the Primordius Dragon had been condensing with all its might, bombarding the remnant consciousness into pieces. Han Shuro's avatar of Death took advantage of this opportunity to summon Earth Elite Zombie. After issuing a command, Earth Elite Zombie charged towards the Primordius Dragon's head like a madman. It burrowed into the Primordius Dragon's gaping maw and rapidly entered the Primordius Dragon's head. The divine soul imprint inside the Primordius Dragon's head gradually dissipated. The Earth Soul Pearl, the ultimate treasure of Earth energy, had become an ownerless object. As the darling of the Earth, Earth Elite Zombie naturally became the new master of the Earth Soul Pearl. Although the consciousness of the Primordius Dragon's divine soul had dissipated, under Han Shuro's control, it did not completely vanish. The divine soul that had yet to dissipate contained the comprehension of the elemental energy of Earth that the Primordius Dragon had painstakingly cultivated for tens of thousands of years. This was the best opportunity that Han Shuro had painstakingly fought for Earth Elite Zombie. Naturally, Earth Elite Zombie would not stand on ceremony. Like a ferocious beast that had been starved for 1,000 years, he greedily occupied the divine soul that had no consciousness. Using the energy of the Earth Soul Pearl, he recklessly absorbed the enormous amount of divine energy of Earth from the Primordius Dragon's body. Seeing that the outcome had been decided, the overjoyed Han Shuro did not relax. His avatar of Death and his consciousness firmly locked onto the Primordius Dragon's soul, fearing that the slightest carelessness could lead to unpredictable consequences. This process lasted for an indeterminate amount of time. It was not until Han Shuro was certain that the Primordius Dragon's consciousness had been completely erased and that Earth Elite Zombie had taken over the Primordius Dragon's divine soul that Han Shuro finally heaved a sigh of relief. The three bodies abruptly withdrew their attacks on the souls and started searching for the location of the interplanar transportation matrix. Without the protection of the Earth Soul Pearl and the support of divine energy, the Primordius Dragon had truly become a body of flesh and blood. It no longer possessed any freakish physical defenses. Han Shuro only observed for a short while before discovering the existence of the interplanar transportation matrix beneath the Primordius Dragon's enormous body. The Primordius Dragon's enormous body must have covered the interplanar transportation matrix with his body. If it wasn't for the fact that his consciousness had dissipated and he had lost all of his energy, even if Han Shuro knew the location of the interplanar transportation matrix, he wouldn't be able to destroy it. This was an enormous interplanar transportation matrix similar to the one in the Cemetery of Death. As it was not deployed by the same person, this interplanar transportation matrix was somewhat different from the one in the Cemetery of Death. Han Shuro did not care about that. After forcibly pushing the Primordius Dragon's body away, he raised the Demon Slayer edge and unleashed his divine energy to bombard the interplanar transportation matrix with all his might. Under Han Shuro's repeated bombardment, the interplanar transportation matrix was finally reduced to dust. There was no way it could be restored. Haha, let's see how you're going to get over here. I've won this battle. Han Shuro threw his head back and laughed heartily. Chapter 644. That's not necessarily true. You're a step too late. We arrived 2 days ago. I went out to look for you, but I couldn't find you. I didn't expect to find you here. Hey, little friend, do you still remember my voice? A discordant, ice-cold voice suddenly sounded while Han Shoror was laughing heartily. The voice came so abruptly that Han Shoror didn't sense it at all. When the voice sounded, Han Shoror couldn't even sense its location. Han Shoror was greatly alarmed. Han Shoror had heard that voice before, back at the Shrine of Ice. Not long ago, when Han Shoror massacred the Shrine of Ice, thousands of believers of the Shrine of Ice made a mid-god from an alien material plane descend upon Snow Celestial Tiana's body with their pious faith. In the snowy region, Han Shoror fought a difficult battle against that expert who couldn't even display 1/10 of his strength. He even injured that expert's divine soul. The ice-cold voice that sounded now belonged to that mid-god of water whose divine soul had descended upon Tiana's body. Not bad. You were actually able to break this barrier. However, now that I've added divine power to it, let's see how you're going to escape now. Catching a turtle in a jar should be referring to this scene. The voice laughed coldly and was filled with disdain. Although Han Shoror had always been confident in himself, he understood that he didn't even have a 10% chance of winning against this mid-god whose divine body and divine soul had descended upon him. At the instant that voice sounded, his two avatars instantly returned to Han Shoror's body. Without the slightest hesitation, Han Shoror hastily transmitted a message to Earth Elite Zombie, ordering him to immediately come out from the primordious dragon's head. Father, there's still a little bit of energy left to absorb. Earth Elite Zombie grumbled unwillingly. He had absolutely no idea how terrifying the enemy he was facing this time was. If you don't come out, both of us will die here. Han Shoror knew that this was not the time to hesitate and hastily transmitted. Earth Elite Zombie was also shocked to hear Han Shoror's words. Without asking any questions, he gave up on absorbing the remaining bit of divine energy from the primordious dragon's body and hastily rushed out of the primordious dragon's bloody mouth. Han Shoror's consciousness locked onto Earth Elite Zombie. He discovered that Earth Elite Zombie had taken possession of the primordious dragon's unconscious divine soul and the Earth Soul Pearl. He knew that Earth Elite Zombie had absorbed at least 80% of the primordious dragon's tens of thousands of years of cultivation. The moment Earth Elite Zombie rushed out of the primordious dragon's bloody mouth, Han Shoror successfully cast necromancy magic. A ray of light flashed and disappeared with Earth Elite Zombie. As soon as the Earth Elite Zombie entered the Netherworld, Han Shoror immediately sensed an exceedingly terrifying energy within the boundary. The space seemed to be frozen by cold air, and the pressure was so great that Han Shoror felt suffocated. It was at this moment that Han Shoror immediately realized that the person had been outside the boundary the entire time when he spoke. It was only at this moment that he had truly entered the boundary. The person who came was a mid-god. He had imbued the boundary with divine energy beforehand. Han Shoror reckoned that even the Demon Slayer Edge would find it difficult to break the boundary. Han Shoror's mind rapidly raced for a countermeasure. We fought last time in that snowy region. You were very arrogant at that time. Today, my main purpose in crossing over to this world is to slowly dismember you to death. I hope you won't disappoint me. The voice was neither hurried nor slow. He had already imbued the boundary with divine energy. He was confident that with Han Shoror's current realm, there was no way he could break the boundary. Therefore, he planned to toy with Han Shoror to death bit by bit. At this moment where he could face death at any moment, Han Shoror remained calm and did not show any signs of panic. His mind rapidly turned and he resolutely came to a decision. Before that mid-god could approach, terrifying bloody light suddenly burst out from Han Shoror's body. Crack, crack, crack. Han Shoror's meridians ruptured and his bones crackled. A dazzling curtain of light enveloped Han Shoror's entire body. All the potential in his body was forced out. In an instant, an incomparably enormous energy magnetic field erupted. The dazzling light flashed and disappeared. When the light dissipated, there was not a single trace left on the spot. Han Shoror had vanished into thin air. A gloomy and cold middle-aged man suddenly appeared at the spot where Han Shoror disappeared after a ray of icy light flashed past. How is this possible? His mouth was wide open and his face was filled with disbelief. His ice-cold eyes were glistening with light. He appeared extremely shocked. How is this possible? How could he have escaped? He's just a low god. There's no way he could have broken my boundary. What's going on? He mumbled to himself. He continuously examined the spot where Han Shoror last stopped, trying to find the reason. After a while, the boundary of water suddenly distorted. A group of 5 people walked over. They were led by a cheerful young man who looked like a white priest of the Church of Light. He smilingly said, "Erickson, what took you so long? What are you doing?" After a short pause, he creased his brows and solemnly said, "He actually killed this Earth dragon. The interplanar transportation matrix has been destroyed." An even louder cry of astonishment came from a woman who looked like a young woman. She appeared to be extremely frightened. "Damn it, that youngster actually dared to come here." The interplanar transportation matrix has been destroyed. This is going to be a little difficult. We don't have anyone who cultivates in the Edict of Space with us this time. That cheerful young man knitted his brows deeply. After pondering for a moment, he hastily asked that person from the Shrine of Ice who was still mumbling to himself, "Erickson, where's that youngster's corpse? Did you find anything? The interplanar transportation matrix here has been destroyed. In that case, we must find the interplanar transportation matrix to the cemetery of death through him. Otherwise, it won't be easy for us to leave after this matter is over." "Impossible, absolutely impossible." Erickson was still mumbling to himself in astonishment. "Erickson, what are you doing? The interplanar transportation matrix has been destroyed. If you don't want to make a long and arduous journey back, quickly search his corpse," that cheerful young man softly shouted. Erickson suddenly came to his senses after hearing his loud shout. His body shuddered. He forced a smile, shook his head, and explained, "Kaiser, I couldn't kill that youngster. He escaped." "What? What did you say?" Not only the young man named Kaiser, but the few experts from the other material planes also cried out in alarm. Erickson was a mid-god. He had even strengthened the boundary around him beforehand. Even if a mid-god were to fight 10 low-gods, it would still be a sure-win situation. His opponents would have absolutely no chance of survival. But Erickson actually said that the youngster escaped. He really did escape. "Up until now, I still don't understand how he escaped," Erickson said in a deep voice with a gloomy face when he saw that everyone was dumbstruck. At this point, everyone understood that Erickson was absolutely not joking. They were just as incredulous as Erickson earlier. They mumbled, "Impossible, absolutely impossible. Could it be that he has a space-splitting divine weapon?" Kaiser suddenly calmed down and asked in a deep voice. "No, I'm sure of it," Erickson firmly replied. "I have been observing his every move ever since he entered the boundary. I didn't sense him using any energy of the 12 fundamental forces, nor did I sense any abnormalities of using a space-splitting divine weapon. The space didn't change either. He just vanished into thin air. How is this possible?" Kaiser was once again astonished. He pondered hard without saying a word. Before he vanished into thin air, something strange happened to his body. His meridians ruptured and his bones shattered. It was as though he had suffered a serious injury. "I don't know what actually happened," Erickson recalled for a moment and explained. "No matter what, we must find him as soon as possible. This person is too important. He is in control of the interplanar transportation matrix. It won't take long for those fellows to arrive. If we can't find that youngster and take control of the cemetery of death's interplanar transportation matrix before they arrive, this matter will become even more troublesome," Kaiser suddenly said in a deep voice after a moment of silence. The other 5, including Erickson, nodded solemnly at the same time. "Everyone, split up and search this continent with all your might. Don't miss a single place where he is most likely to be hiding. Remember, once you find him, don't be in a hurry to kill him. First, change the interplanar transportation matrix's settings. We must not let those fellows come over," Kaiser instructed. "When we find him, please do me a favor and capture him alive if you can. I want to skin him alive with my own hands," Erickson said fiercely. The party of 6 said no more. Before they left, Kaiser raised his hand and wrapped the Primordius dragon's corpse with a blazing light. The Primordius dragon gradually dissolved in the white light until it disappeared. Thousands of miles away, on a barren mountain on the western border of the Orc Empire, the blood-stained Han Shoror was miserably hanging from a withered tree. He cut an extremely sorry figure. The demonic blood disassembly had stimulated the latent potential within Han Shoror's body. The instant his meridians and bones were shattered, Han Shoror had fled thousands of miles away and escaped from Ericsson's murderous hands. The demonic blood disassembly was a vicious demonic art used for escaping. Once it was released, it would greatly damage one's vitality and damage one's demonic body. This time, Han Shoror's meridians and bones were shattered. He had no strength left in his body. Coincidentally, he was hanging from a large tree. This made Han Shoror feel extremely unlucky. Within a day's time, Han Shoror's meridians and bones were completely destroyed. It was impossible for him to reconnect his meridians and bones to the point where he could move his limbs. Under such circumstances, Han Shoror could not gather the energy within his body, nor could he summon any undead creatures to protect him. He could only continue to waste his energy like this. During the recovery process, Han Shoror would be unable to move for a period of time. If an enemy were to approach during this time, Han Shoror would be as powerless as a lamb waiting to be slaughtered, and would be at the mercy of the enemy. Fortunately, Han Shoror was able to determine the direction when he used the demonic blood disassembly to escape. He happened to arrive at this uninhabited barren mountain. Otherwise, if he were to fall into an orc tribe and be discovered by those barbaric orcs, Han Shoror would be in big trouble. Han Shoror maintained the miserable posture of hanging from the tree from dusk until dawn. Not a single living creature approached him. Han Shoror secretly rejoiced in his heart. He rejoiced that the Orc Empire was barren and that there were no ferocious magical beasts nearby. Only then could he continue to recover his body. However, Han Shoror's good luck did not last long. Not long after the sky brightened, the sound of footsteps slowly approaching made Han Shoror a little apprehensive. This was Han Shoror's most vulnerable moment. Even a child wielding a sharp weapon would be able to inflict serious damage on him in this state. It was really just a young orc. He was wrapped in a piece of animal skin, barefooted, and carried a large basket on his back. It seemed that he had come to this barren mountain to chop firewood. At first, he did not notice Han Shoror on top of the withered tree above him. He only lowered his head and silently chopped the withered tree. It was only when a drop of blood dripped from Han Shoror's body that he was surprised to think that it was going to rain did he naturally raise his head to look at the sky. As soon as he looked, he suddenly pointed at Han Shoror and cried out in alarm. After killing so many orcs, Han Shoror could understand the orc language with just one soul. Therefore, when Han Shoror focused for a moment, he quickly understood the meaning of the gibberish. Ah, why is there a dead person? And it's a human. What bad luck today, to encounter something like this so early in the morning. Han Shoror did not know whether to laugh or cry. The root of his tongue was broken, and he was currently recovering. He could not speak for the time being. He could only blink his eyes and look down at the young orc in confusion. "I haven't eaten breakfast yet," the young orc muttered. Han Shoror's heart trembled. He had not had much contact with orcs. He had long heard that orcs were extremely barbaric and seemed to have a hobby of eating humans. When he heard this young orc say that he had not eaten breakfast yet, Han Shoror's state of mind, which had not been disturbed for many years, really panicked. Could it be, with Han Shoror's physical body at the Nine Changes realm, even if the young orc stabbed him with a sharp weapon, he would be able to recover as long as he was given some time. However, if this young orc were to eat his flesh right in front of him, that would be too disgusting. While Han Shoror was on tenterhooks, the young orc snorted and cursed. "What a disgusting scene. How am I going to eat breakfast after seeing it for the entire morning?" When he said this, the panicking Han Shoror was overjoyed. It turned out that the young orc didn't want to eat human flesh. It seemed that the rumors about orcs outside were not entirely true. "My mother said that people should be buried when they die. This guy is too unlucky. He actually died on a tree. Oh, forget it. It's sad to see him. I'll help him." The young orc muttered a few words. Then, he swung a not-so-sharp axe and began to chop down the tree that Han-shuro was hanging on. Not long after, the tree collapsed with a loud bang. Han-shuro fell to the ground, smashing a small pit in the ground. "Wow, this human is so heavy," the young orc cried out in surprise. He ran toward Han-shuro with great curiosity. He seemed to be somewhat excited. Han-shuro's body was indeed much heavier than an ordinary person's. When he fell, he broke many branches of the tree and only managed to hang on the largest branches. It was not strange that he was so surprised. The little young orc walked quickly toward Han-shuro. When he arrived at Han-shuro's side, he looked at him in amazement. This young orc didn't seem to be as evil as Han-shuro. He didn't seem to have the hobby of plundering the corpses of the dead. He merely sized up Han-shuro with great curiosity. "Ah, the heart is still beating." The young orc was startled and cried out involuntarily. He was quite frightened. In the process of physical recovery, the most important parts would be the first to be repaired. The heart was an essential organ of the human body. At this time, it had already been repaired and was beating normally. However, a bloody man dripping with blood, with wounds everywhere, and looking as if he couldn't be more dead still had a tenacious heart beating. To the young orc, this was indeed too unimaginable. Chapter 645. Han-shuro lay on the ground, gradually calming down as he listened to the young orc's shouts. Although the young orc was strong, it was difficult for him to truly harm Han-shuro. With the strength of his body, even if the young orc used his axe to hack at him, Han-shuro would still be able to recover afterwards. Therefore, Han-shuro didn't appear to be flustered. He allowed the young orc to shout and wrangle as he silently waited for his body to recover. After a while, Han-shuro opened his eyes, his deep, pitch-black pupils landing on the little orc. The young orc turned pale with fright when he was stared at by Han-shuro. He abruptly took a dozen steps back and looked at Han-shuro in fright, shouting in panic, "Are you dead or not?" Han-shuro couldn't speak for the time being as his tongue hadn't recovered. He could only look at the little orc, blinking his eyes. The young orc stared at Han-shuro in fright for a while. Seeing that Han-shuro was only looking at him calmly without malice or taking any action, the young orc's courage grew a little. He then walked towards Han-shuro. Is there anything I can help you with?" the young orc asked cautiously as he stared into Han-shuro's eyes after thinking for a while. He was still a kind orc, Han-shuro thought to himself. He continued to look at the young orc calmly, waiting for his tongue to recover. "What's wrong with you? Are you going to die? How can I help you?" The simple and honest young orc wasn't tainted by the bad habits of humans who killed and robbed. He only asked again and again with a sincere attitude. After a while, 2 streaks of blood flowed out from the corner of Han-shuro's mouth. His mouth wriggled a little, and he suddenly spoke weakly in the orc language, "Thank you, but there's no need." The demonic infant in his body gradually recovered. Han-shuro could feel that the cells and blood essence in the demonic infant were regrowing under the effect of demonic yuan. The demonic infant was the foundation of Han-shuro's demonic body. As long as the demonic infant recovered, the source of Han-shuro's demonic yuan would be able to operate. The recovery process of his body would also accelerate. The 2 avatars hidden in the demonic infant would also be able to immediately escape. Although Han-shuro was anxious, he knew that this young orc wouldn't be able to help him at all. Therefore, he didn't bother to say anything. This place was 1,000 miles away from where the primordious dragon had perished. It wasn't too far, but it wasn't too short either. It wasn't too far either. For a divine realm expert, it wouldn't take too long to cross 1,000 miles without using any transportation matrices. That mid-god of the Shrine of Ice would definitely be unwilling to see Han-shuro vanish right before his eyes. Han-shuro was certain that that person wouldn't let him go. Perhaps, at this moment, that person had already started searching for traces of Han-shuro from that area. Naturally, this young orc couldn't harm Han-shuro. However, If that mid-god of the Shrine of Ice were to find him under such circumstances, Han Shor believed that only death awaited him. No need. Your injuries are so severe. If we don't treat it in time, you will surely bleed to death, the young orc cried out in alarm and jumped up. I've already stopped bleeding. Don't worry, I won't die. Just do whatever you need to do. Don't worry about me. As the demonic infant gradually recovered, Han Shor's weak voice became slightly louder. I'll help you take care of it. I'm not asking for anything in return. You humans are always so strange. I've heard from my mother that you humans talk about repaying favors and not being willing to accept favors from others. The young orc didn't leave as Han Shor expected. He mumbled to himself, took out a small leather pouch from his waist, and took out a crude medicine bottle. He poured out some powder from the pouch and smeared it on Han Shor's scarred body. Han Shor could sense that the powder was just the most ordinary medicine to staunch bleeding and prevent bacterial infection. It was practically useless when smeared on Han Shor's body. Thank you, but I really don't need it. Han Shor's voice slowly regained its calmness. His listless eyes also regained some vigor. You've suffered such severe injuries. If you don't need it, nobody will. All right, don't worry. I'm not asking for anything in return. You're so annoying. The young orc grumbled impatiently. He didn't care whether Han Shor agreed or not. In any case, he smeared all the powder in his medicine bottle on Han Shor's wounds. It was obvious that this was a very kind-hearted young man. Feeling the slight coolness produced by the powder on his skin, Han Shor felt a warm feeling in his heart. All right, do as you please. Han Shor said no more. He used his eyes to size up the young orc who was meticulously smearing the powder on his wounds and bandaging them without a care for the dirt. Looking at the young orc's attentive appearance, Han Shor, who was a little worried that the person from the Shrine of Ice might come looking for him at any time, gradually calmed down. As his mind calmed down, his body's recovery process seemed to have sped up a little. This phenomenon made him feel even more relaxed. What's your name? What are you doing here? Han Shor no longer cared about the condition of his body. Instead, he appeared to be very leisurely asking the young orc. My name is Tuaf. I'm here to chop some wood, he replied casually. Soon after, he said in a strange tone, You're really a strange human. You're on the verge of death, yet you don't have the slightest reaction. You even have the mood to talk to me. As soon as the conversation began, the two gradually loosened their restraints. Through his communication with Tuaf, Han Shor learned about his family's circumstances. Through him, Han Shor also learned about the orc's hardships. As it turned out, because the land was barren and crops could not be cultivated, there were orcs starving to death every day. Those rumors about orcs eating humans were indeed true. Under such circumstances, if the orcs wished to survive, they had no choice but to think of other ways. Plundering the southern border was a helpless action they had to take in order to survive. Over the past 2 years, the Orc Empire had sunk into a predicament that had not been seen in 100 years. A large number of orcs had starved to death. Some of the older orcs were unwilling to waste food and committed suicide in groups so that their descendants could survive. Many orc villages were shrouded in the shadow of death. Under such circumstances, the major orc tribes were unprecedentedly united. They did not hesitate to sacrifice the lives of a large number of orc warriors in order to invade the southern border and occupy a piece of fertile land so that they could alleviate the miserable situation of their own empires that were littered with corpses. Tuaf's village was considered to be in a better situation. It was only because there were some wild beasts in the surrounding barren hills that they could barely survive by relying on these wild beasts. However, the wild beasts in the barren hills were limited. Take the place where Han Shor was staying for example. There used to be many lone wolves, pythons, and the like, but they had all been captured and killed. Only withered trees were left to be used as firewood. As he listened to Tuaf's description of the current situation in the Orc Empire, Han Shor's heart was filled with mixed emotions. It was the first time he recognized the orcs' hardships. When he recalled that he had personally killed more than 100,000 orc warriors who had no choice but to come to the southern border for survival, he could not help but feel an indescribable sense of guilt. This conversation made Han Shoror realize that there were actually kind and upright people among the barbaric orcs. It was also because they had no other choice but to invade the southern border. If one were to look at things from a different perspective, one would sometimes come up with a different point of view. Finally, Han Shoror's demonic infant completed its restoration unknowingly while they were talking. With a thought, the avatar of death hidden in the demonic infant suddenly flew out and transformed into another identical Han Shoror in front of the young orc. Ah, this. The little orc retreated in shock. He pointed at the skeletal staff that had transformed into Han Shoror. He was so panic-stricken that he could not even finish his sentence. "You're a pretty good lad. It can be considered fate that we met today. Take this thing and don't let anyone know about it. This thing will be useful to you. As long as you comprehend it with your heart, you might become an amazing great shaman." Han Shoror took out a necklace made of animal bones and hung it around the young orc's neck. A cold glint pierced through the young orc's fingertip and a few drops of blood flowed into the necklace made of animal bones. In an instant, the young orc's face turned lifeless as though he had suffered a heavy blow. His body was on the verge of collapsing, as though it had been battered by turbulent waves. This necklace made of animal bones was obtained by Han Shoror when he killed the old shaman outside of Osun City. The old shaman was on the verge of breaking through to base god. The necklace made of animal bones was similar to a space ring and contained some kind of miraculous energy inherited from it. Han Shoror had no use for it all this time. The energy inherited from the necklace made of animal bones could only be received by an orc without any cultivation foundation. It could also be considered fate that he met Tuaf. Although he did not really help Han Shoror still appreciated his kind intentions. In addition, Tuaf was kind-hearted, honest, and straightforward. Therefore, Han Shoror decided to let him inherit the energy of the necklace made of animal bones. Of course, Tuaf would not be able to reach the sky in a single bound after inheriting the energy. At most, he could only communicate with the powerful magical beasts that Tuaf had subdued in the past. As for whether Tuaf could subdue those powerful magical beasts or use the energy inherited from him to cultivate the secret shaman arts to the same realm as the old shaman, Han Shoror had no idea. Han Shoror had only pointed out a bright path to him. Whether he could walk to the end or not would still depend on Tuaf himself. The slight trembling of Tuaf's body signified the success of the energy inheritance. While he was clenching his teeth and enduring the energy inherited from him, Han Shoror's avatar of death had already left with his injured main body. Tuaf felt as though he was in a turbulent current. Some strange things were surging into his brain and body, giving him an extremely uncomfortable feeling. After an unknown period of time, Tuaf's body gradually stopped trembling. He felt that his brain was muddle-headed and filled with many things that did not belong to him. "Hey! Where's that weirdo?" Tuaf suddenly cried out in alarm after he regained consciousness. He lowered his head and discovered that the place where Han Shoror had just stood was completely empty. There was not even a trace of him. On the flat yellow ground, someone had used a finger to deeply carve some words. "Tuaf, it is fate that brought us together. I don't know if what I did was right or wrong for you, but I feel that the orcs need a leader like you. The profound meaning of shaman has been inherited into your body. If you are willing, you can continue to cultivate in silence and contribute to the orcs." When you can become a great shaman and have a certain level of authority among the orcs, and when you want to find a way out for the orcs, you can come to Lancelot Empire's Brettel City to look for me. I am the City Lord of Brettel City, Brian. Remember these words. Inheritance of the profound meaning of shaman? What does that mean? What a strange human. Tuaf muttered to himself as he looked at the words under his feet in a daze. All of a sudden, as though a ray of light had streaked across his mind, the muddle-headed orc teenager seemed to have understood something in an instant. He suddenly jumped up and started laughing like a madman. "Haha, I can become a great shaman. This is unbelievable. I must have met the orc god. The orc god is guiding me." Although Han Shoror could predict that the orc teenager would be wild with joy after learning the truth, He did not expect that the orc teenager would become the most respected shaman among the orcs many years later. Not only that, but he had also solved the problem that had been troubling the orcs for a long time. His avatar of death carried Han Shuor's avatar and flew along some remote roads. They finally returned to South Border City at the southern border before the sky turned dark. In South Border City, Han Shuor had become a god that everyone revered. Han Shuor didn't even dare to show his face in public, fearing that he would cause a commotion among the people here. Draped in a pitch-black magical robe, Han Shuor used the transportation matrix and arrived at Brettel City. Without greeting anyone, he used the transportation matrix in Brettel City to return to the Cemetery of Death on the gourd-shaped island in the middle of the boundless sea. Just in case, he even changed the location of the transportation matrix in the depths of the City Lord's mansion in Brettel City. He placed it under a filthy and smelly quagmire outside the city, and concealed the magical aura on it with demonic arts. Those people should be very familiar with elemental energy. However, the power of demonic arts was different from any energy they were familiar with. Han Shuor believed that by concealing it with demonic arts, they would not be able to detect its location. Inside the Cemetery of Death on the gourd-shaped island in the boundless sea, Han Shuor's main body immediately resumed his cultivation. His two avatars of destruction stayed in the Cemetery of Death, while his avatar of death walked out. He wanted to see if there were any abnormalities in the surroundings to ensure that nothing would go wrong. Unexpectedly, as soon as Han Shuor's avatar of death walked out of the Cemetery of Death, he sensed a fairly strong soul occupying a deserted island not far away from the gourd-shaped island. That soul immediately sensed Han Shuor's presence. It furiously transmitted, "I've finally found you. If you don't scram back to my territory, I'll come and kill you." Han Shuor knew that the soul was the same one he sensed last time, a sea super-rank magical beast with strength similar to Pegasus. "You're courting death." Han Shuor was not in a good mood. On top of that, he didn't want any living creature in the surroundings to reveal his whereabouts. Therefore, he immediately transmitted his killing intent to the soul. Chapter 646. That creature in the boundless sea had been searching for Han Shuor in the vicinity. It was fully deserving of its title as the mightiest being in this part of the sea. It was used to having all living creatures kneel at its feet. Any creature that dared to oppose it had long been killed by it. Over the years, its habitual victories had made it believe that it was the mightiest being on Profound Continent. If it wasn't for the fact that it couldn't leave the sea for too long, it might have long gone to stir up trouble on land. As soon as the creature received Han Shuor's message, it flew into a rage and charged straight at Han Shuor from the island with monstrous ferocity. Even though Han Shuor was on the gourd-shaped island, he could sense the enormous waves. He could tell that this creature was as large as the primordial dragon. Otherwise, the waves wouldn't have caused such a huge reaction. There was a cemetery of death on the gourd-shaped island. Han Shuor did not want to leave any traces of battle on the island. He immediately flew away from the gourd-shaped island as soon as he sensed the creature approaching. In the sea between the two islands, Han Shuor, who was hovering in the air, encountered the enormous creature in the depths of the sea. Waves rose to the sky like a hurricane. Sparkling and translucent water droplets rose from the bottom of the sea like a fine rain and rolled back into the depths of the sea. An enormous shadow gradually surfaced from the depths of the waves. With a loud crashing sound, the shadow emerged from the bottom of the sea and sent a furious message straight at Han Shuor. "Damned human, the sea is not a place you should be. How dare you challenge my majesty? You will die today." Han Shuor had a clear view of the creature the moment it emerged from the bottom of the sea. It was a sea monster that resembled an octopus. It was enormous in size and had many tentacles. When it bared its fangs and brandished its claws, its tentacles extended and fluttered in all directions. It appeared to possess astonishing strength. The vital parts of the sea monster's abdomen were covered with a layer of shell-like armor. The armor was as hard as metal and protected the most important parts of its body from harm. As it bared its fangs and brandished its claws, the sea monster gradually flew out from the depths of the sea. Han Shoror had expected a creature of its level to be able to fly. Giant octopus, are you courting death? Han Shoror asked with a cold smile as he watched the sea monster bare its fangs and brandish its claws to threaten him. Some of the foreign races, due to their unique body structure, did not need to cultivate in any of the 12 fundamental forces. For example, the 6-horned tribal king of the soul race, Pegasus, and the ancient lizard king. These alien races either had extremely powerful bodies or special abilities. As long as they focused on one aspect and continued to evolve, they would grow stronger and stronger. This octopus-like sea creature should also be one of those alien races. Han Shoror couldn't sense the existence of any of the 12 fundamental forces in it, but its soul was extremely powerful. This made Han Shoror realize that this sea monster should have evolved using the alien race's innate talent. Big octopus. You actually think I'm such a lowly creature? Wretched human, you will pay for your unkindness. The sea monster flew to the surface of the sea. Water droplets were spraying all over its body as it furiously shouted. Look at you. What are you if not an octopus? Han Shoror stared blankly for a moment and found it rather hilarious. I'm not an octopus. I've never been one. As though someone had poked a scar in its heart, the sea monster flew into a rage. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it charged at Han Shoror. Its enormous tentacles fluttered in the air. It was truly a beautiful sight. The domain of divinity couldn't be of much use against this kind of alien race that did not rely on elemental energy. Seeing the sea monster's tentacles fluttering in the air, Han Shoror sneered and consecutively deployed weakness, fear, and other necromancy boundaries around him. Before the sea monster could approach, Han Shoror had already cast one great disintegration after another at the sea monster. Under the effects of the several trump card boundaries of the netherworld, the sea monster's intimidating movements gradually became sluggish and powerless. Its flying speed became slower and slower. The boundaries deployed by the low-god realm Han Shoror were extremely effective against the sea monster and greatly affected it. The boundaries deployed by the low-god realm Han Shoror were extremely effective against the sea monster. The tentacles that fluttered in the air suddenly shattered and fell into the sea, splattering blood in all directions. Being at the center of the boundaries, the sea monster couldn't approach Han Shoror at all. Its tentacles were shattered one after another. This made the sea monster extremely furious, but there was nothing it could do. Wretched human, you are despicable. Unable to approach Han Shoror, the sea monster's body grew weaker and weaker. It could only roar powerlessly and furiously. Tempage, do you really think you're invincible with your meager strength? Han Shoror sneered disdainfully as he looked at the sea monster struggling. Another necromancy magic was released. An enormous cage of bones appeared out of thin air below the sea monster. White bones were assembled together and forcefully trapped the sea monster's enormous body, preventing it from moving at will. Without Han Shoror making any movements, rows of bone spears ruthlessly stabbed at the sea monster. The sea monster let out a series of strange cries as though it was in extreme pain. You sure know how to put on an act. Han Shoror sneered. The bone spears that landed on the sea monster's body only left streaks of blood on its tentacles. Due to the shell-like armor around the sea monster's abdomen, Han Shoror's bone spears only made clanking noises before vanishing. They couldn't cause any direct damage to the sea monster. One could tell that the armor was extremely sturdy and the tentacles weren't the sea monster's vital points. Therefore, it was obvious that the sea monster was faking its cries. Having the experience of dealing with the primordious dragon, Han Shoror was no longer afraid of creatures that possessed astonishing physical defense but lacked the ability to defend or attack with their souls. He didn't even use the soul shatter that he had recently mastered. Han Shoror concentrated his mental strength and fiercely bombarded the sea monster with soul tremor. Naturally, the might of the same magic released would be completely different due to the difference in their realms. Han Shoror, who was in the low god realm, once again released soul tremor. The sea monster was similarly unable to withstand it. With just one soul tremor, the sea monster's ghastly white fangs let out miserable cries that sounded like ghosts wailing and wolves howling. The cries were extremely rapid and forceful. It was obvious that they weren't faking it. The cries were mournful at first but gradually grew weaker. It was obvious that the sea monster had suffered serious injuries. Scream again. Let's see how much longer you can keep screaming. Han Shor cruelly looked down at the sea monster beneath his feet and prepared to launch another wave of soul attack. Spare me, spare me. The sea monster was very sensible. When it saw that Han Shor had the strength to kill it, it immediately admitted defeat and hastily begged for mercy. Han Shor stared blankly. He didn't expect that such a powerful creature would immediately bow and beg for mercy upon encountering an existence stronger than itself. When the sea monster saw that Han Shor didn't say a word, it thought that Han Shor was hesitating and hastily shouted, "Spare me, I won't do it again. From today onwards, this sea is your territory. I promise to stay far away from you." Han Shor was speechless. Looking at the sea monster that was previously enraged but was now begging for mercy, he couldn't help but think of Dark Dragon Gilbert, who had gone to the underground world. The sea monster and Dark Dragon Gilbert were two completely different creatures. However, Han Shor discovered many similarities between the two. When he thought of Dark Dragon Gilbert, Han Shor suddenly felt a little worried. The secret to the depths of the underground world was in the hands of the Dark Dragons. At this time, the experts of various material planes seemed to be interested in the depths of the underground world. They would certainly go there and take a look. Han Shor was worried that Dark Dragon Gilbert would be implicated. "Please spare me. I'm just a lowly and insignificant octopus. You won't gain anything by killing me. You'll just be wasting your energy." Seeing that Han Shor was silent, the sea monster continued to prattle and beg. It had finally admitted that it was a lowly octopus. "Give me a reason not to kill you." Perhaps because this sea monster was very similar to Gilbert in some aspects, Han Shor didn't kill it as he usually did. He only asked after a moment of silence, "I know a secret. There might be a great treasure hidden there. I can take you there as long as you don't kill me." The sea monster thought for a moment and hastily shouted after hearing Han Shor's words, "Oh, what treasure?" Han Shor wasn't particularly interested and casually asked, "I don't know either. That place is very mysterious. Even I can't enter it. But you're so powerful that you should be able to enter. I'm willing to take you there immediately as long as you don't kill me." The sea monster immediately became very anxious when it saw that Han Shor wasn't particularly interested. "All right then. Lead the way. If that place is really interesting, I'll consider sparing your life." Han Shor was indifferent as he said indifferently. The sea monster felt as if it had been pardoned. It was as if it had grasped onto a life-saving straw. Just as it was about to lead the way, it immediately sensed the awkwardness of its current situation. It said pitifully, "Can you let me go first?" Han Shor wasn't afraid that it would escape. Therefore, he withdrew the boundary energy and removed the huge cage of bones that had trapped it. "If you dare escape, I guarantee that you'll die a horrible death," Han Shor warned with a cold smile. The sea monster was startled and repeatedly said that it wouldn't dare. Its huge body suddenly fell into the sea and its huge shadow rapidly disappeared into the distance. This sea monster truly possessed the characteristics of an octopus. The tentacles that had been severed by Han Shor didn't sink after falling into the sea. When the sea monster's huge body fell into the sea, its severed tentacles actually coiled around the severed parts like little snakes and stuck tightly together. It seemed that it wouldn't be difficult for the severed tentacles to regenerate after some time. After a moment of observation, Han Shor was quite amazed by this sea monster's self-healing ability. He wondered if the creator of the demonic arts had used this creature's ability when he created the body-shaping secret art. This was because its self-healing ability was even more miraculous than that of an octopus. Han Shor unhurriedly followed behind the sea monster. He discovered that the sea monster was indeed very well behaved. It didn't even dare to deliberately slow down. It seemed that it was indeed afraid of Han Shor's deterrence. They soon arrived at their destination. It wasn't far from the sea monster's original position. It was the area that Han Shor's consciousness couldn't enter the last time he tried to extend it. So it's here. I should have known. Han Shoror mumbled to himself when he arrived. How did you know this place? Impossible, you shouldn't know this place. I was the first to discover this place. There's no one more familiar with this place than me. I've never seen you here before. It's impossible for you to know this place. The sea monster suddenly raised its voice when it heard Han Shoror's mumbling. Don't talk nonsense. I discovered this place by accident when I sensed your position last time. What's there to make a fuss about? Han Shoror snorted impatiently. The sea monster immediately recalled its situation and tactfully shut its mouth. It didn't dare to say anything else. Seeing that the sea monster had shut its mouth, Han Shoror dove into the sea and followed the sea monster to the bottom of the island. In the depths of the island, there was a cluster of seaweed. He sensed the existence of the boundary that had blocked his consciousness last time. This is the place, right? Han Shoror asked indifferently. Yes, it seems that there's something invisible blocking it. I can't get in, the sea monster explained. The sea monster explained. After a pause, the sea monster suddenly said faintly, but there are some peculiar energies that would overflow in this place. When I was just a little octopus, I accidentally ate something here and was struck by the overflowing energy. That's how I ended up like this. What? Han Shoror was taken aback. Looking at the incomparably enormous sea monster, he cried out in disbelief, the energy that overflowed from you made you so powerful? Yes, I'm sure. The sea monster hastily replied. It was rather miraculous. Han Shoror was extremely astonished. The energy that flowed out from the boundary had struck a little octopus, and then the little octopus had turned into an overlord of the ocean. This made Han Shoror feel that the boundary was inconceivable. Han Shoror's heart was in turmoil. He looked at the invisible boundary in front of him and pondered for a moment. He felt that only by touching it with his hand could he truly understand what kind of energy was attached to the boundary. Han Shoror slowly walked to the front, stretched out his hand and gradually pressed it against the boundary. Before he could get close to the boundary, a peculiar energy suddenly gushed out and curled towards Han Shoror's outstretched hand. The energy was so powerful that even Han Shoror, who was at this realm, had no choice but to retreat in a panic. A ball of misty green light that was full of vitality flashed across the surface of the boundary. Soon after, the boundary returned to normal. Han Shoror, who had retreated at top speed, broke out in cold sweat. He sensed an extremely powerful attack from the boundary, and it was aimed at him. After carefully thinking for a moment, Han Shoror came to a sudden realization. He cried out in surprise, so it's the energy of the Edict of Life. No wonder. Only the mysterious Edict of Life could change the life form of the giant octopus and make it so powerful. The Edict of Life and the elemental energy of death had always been mutually exclusive. It was only natural that Han Shoror's avatar of death would be attacked by the boundary. After weighing the pros and cons in his mind, Han Shoror felt that he didn't have the strength to resist the boundary. He pondered for a moment and suddenly recalled Would Elite Zombie. He was overjoyed and immediately summoned Would Elite Zombie. Chapter 647. Would Elite Zombie's energy was brimming with vitality, in line with the Edict of Life. After he obtained the Virid Leaf, the wood attribute treasure, he had once again evolved. Therefore, opening this boundary shouldn't be a problem. After being summoned, Would Elite Zombie looked around in astonishment. Suddenly, he pointed at the boundary and transmitted to Han Shoror, Father, there's something strange in there. Han Shoror didn't find it strange in the slightest. Nodding, Han Shoror replied smilingly, That's right. There's something strange in there that might be useful to you. Can you go in? I don't know. Would Elite Zombie replied. After a short pause, he continued, But I can give it a try. All right, try your best to open it and see what's going on inside, instructed Han Shoror. What the hell is going on? The sea monster exclaimed in surprise when it saw that there was another person in the room. As the 5 elite zombies gradually evolved, they became less and less like stiff and lifeless zombies. While their strength rapidly increased, the aura of death on their bodies gradually disappeared. They were becoming more and more like ordinary humans. This was especially true for Wood Elite Zombie. After obtaining the Viride leaf, Wood Elite Zombie had evolved to the next level. The aura of death on his body was completely gone. On the contrary, one could sense the energy brimming with vitality on his body. Even his appearance had undergone some changes. His complexion was becoming more and more normal. "It's none of your business. Stay here with me and don't move." Han Shoror shot a glance at the sea monster and coldly instructed. After the previous battle, the sea monster was fearful of Han Shoror and dared not disobey Han Shoror. Although it was puzzled, it did not say anything. It remained silent and focused its attention on Wood Elite Zombie. It wanted to see what Wood Elite Zombie was going to do. After arriving before the boundary, Wood Elite Zombie stretched out his hand. An energy brimming with vitality flowed into the boundary through Wood Elite Zombie's palm. The boundary that was filled with hostility towards Han Shoror and would automatically attack the moment it sensed the energy of death in Han Shoror's body approaching. This time, it did not have the slightest intention of attacking. It appeared to be very calm. "Father, I can go in. I feel very comfortable with this energy. It doesn't have any ill intent towards me," Wood Elite Zombie happily transmitted to Han Shoror. Everything was within Han Shoror's expectations. After hearing Wood Elite Zombie's words, Han Shoror thought for a moment and said, "All right then, go in and see what's going on inside. If you can remove the barrier, try to remove it." "All right." The Wood Elite Zombie replied excitedly, somewhat impatient. It seemed that he was very interested in what was inside. Wood Elite Zombie's body melted into the barrier like a drop of water in front of Han Shoror and the sea monster. The barrier did not rebound in the slightest. He disappeared. Disappeared inside. How is that possible? The sea monster had been paying attention to Wood Elite Zombie. When he saw that Wood Elite Zombie was able to enter the place that he had been unable to enter all this while, he cried out in surprise. "Cut the crap. Just watch carefully." Han Shoror softly groaned. The sea monster once again shut his mouth. His soul became extremely unstable. Many of the tentacles on his enormous body swayed involuntarily, as though expressing his amazement and disbelief. Although Han Shoror could detect Wood Elite Zombie's position the moment he entered the barrier, he could not sense what was going on inside the barrier through Wood Elite Zombie. Just like the sea monster, Han Shoror maintained his silence. Just like that, Han Shoror and the sea monster stood outside the barrier, waiting for any changes that might occur to the barrier. Soon after, the invisible barrier once again emitted gentle green halos that were as weak as the glow of fireflies. Gradually, those faint green halos and the barrier seemed to be pulled back little by some kind of energy. Han Shoror could sense that the barrier that had been obstructing him was gradually disappearing. The sea monster also noticed this. Its tentacles swayed even more vigorously, but it dared not make a ruckus. Soon enough, the green halos gradually retracted. The scenery that had been obstructed finally appeared before Han Shoror and the sea monster's eyes. A small tree with lush branches and leaves appeared at the bottom of the island. This small tree wasn't very big, and every leaf was as green as jade, faintly emitting a faint green light. The small branches were intertwined and full of vitality, and the aura of life was extremely exuberant. The Wood Elite Zombie stood in front of the small tree, carefully sizing it up, as if he was fascinated by it. How is this possible? How can such a strange tree survive at the bottom of the ocean? The sea monster cried out in surprise, unable to restrain its curiosity. "Nothing is impossible," Han Shoror softly cried out. Soon after, he delightfully transmitted to Earth Elite Zombie, "Try to absorb the energy contained in that tree." By now, Han Shoror was no longer an ignorant and ill-informed person. Through the memories left behind by the original owner of the skeletal staff, and through the knowledge of Bekimos and that person inside the Holy Grail, Han Shoror had gained some understanding of the general knowledge of various material planes. That small tree emitting an extremely dense aura of life should be the legendary tree of life. It was said that those who cultivated in the Edict of Life could, under certain special circumstances, pass on the energy of life before their death and transform into a tree of life. This tree of life before Han Shuro should be a cultivator of the edict of life who, knowing that his life was nearing its end, altered his life imprint and transformed into a tree of life. In a certain sense, the god who transformed into a tree of life didn't die, but merely changed his way of life. A tree of life that was transformed by a god into a tree of life contained an intense energy of life and perhaps even some of that god's consciousness. It was very precious. Han Shuro had only heard of legends that those who cultivated in the edict of life could transform into a tree of life. He also knew that the tree of life was very miraculous. However, Han Shuro wasn't particularly clear about its specific uses. Han Shuro believed that the tree of life would be extremely useful to Wood Elite Zombie. From what Han Shuro saw, Wood Elite Zombie could only reap the greatest benefits by taking possession of the tree of life. The best way to take possession of the tree of life was to absorb all the energy of life from the tree of life. Wood Elite Zombie stood in front of the tree of life and stared blankly for quite a while. Even after receiving Han Shuro's message, Wood Elite Zombie remained silent. After an indeterminate amount of time, as though he suddenly recalled Han Shuro's instructions, Wood Elite Zombie took out the wood attribute treasure, the virid leaf, and placed it on the tree of life. In an instant, both the tree of life and the virid leaf blossomed with dazzling green radiance. Vigorous energy of life erupted from the tree of life and rapidly flowed into Wood Elite Zombie through the virid leaf. "It's actually working," Han Shuro cried out in surprise, appearing extremely astonished. Han Shuro had indeed issued that order to Wood Elite Zombie. However, Han Shuro wasn't sure if that order would allow Wood Elite Zombie to absorb the energy from the tree of life. When the vitality of the tree of life flourished and frantically flowed into Wood Elite Zombie's body, Han Shuro was immediately startled and overjoyed. What is he doing?" the sea monster couldn't help but ask urgently. "He's absorbing the energy inside. It's the energy that allowed you to evolve from a little octopus to this state." Han Shuro was overjoyed and laughed heartily. I want it too," the sea monster suddenly said after staring blankly for a long while. You are the one who wants to die, aren't you?" Han Shuro looked at the sea monster in amusement and said disdainfully, "Your body simply can't withstand too much of that energy. You'd better give up." Han Shuro was telling the truth. The reason Wood Elite Zombie could absorb the energy from the tree of life was that his energy came from the same source as that energy. In addition, Wood Elite Zombie had a unique body structure that allowed him to absorb the energy from the tree of life. The sea monster's evolution back then was indeed triggered by the energy of life from the tree of life. However, Han Shuro believed that it was something that happened a long time ago. The reason why he could slowly evolve to his current strength was absolutely not just because of that bit of energy of life. The energy of life merely opened a door for him. He should be relying on himself for the subsequent evolution. If one were to forcefully absorb too much energy from a different type of energy, only death would await them. Fortunately, the sea monster had only obtained a little bit of energy of life. If he had been struck by a lot of energy, he would have died. It was absolutely impossible for him to evolve to this stage. Under Han Shuro's attentive gaze, the energy of the tree of life rapidly flowed into Wood Elite Zombie. In the process, the radiance of the tree of life gradually dimmed. Not long after, the tree of life withered. Its leaves dried up and fell off one after another. The energy that was brimming with vitality vanished. On the other hand, Earth Elite Zombie's pale face turned rosy. His complexion was getting better and better. The virid leaf in his hand was lush and verdant. It seemed to be brimming with energy. In the end, the energy of the tree of life was completely exhausted. In Han Shuro's eyes, the roots of the tree of life had turned into dried bones. There was no trace of wood left. It appeared that after the energy of life was exhausted, the original appearance of the god that had transformed into the tree of life was gradually revealed. While Wood Elite Zombie was enjoying the energy that he had suddenly obtained, Han Shuro, on the other hand, was concentrating on observing the surroundings of the bones. However, he did not discover any traces that could reveal his identity. After a long while Han Shuro was still diligently observing the traces of the tree of life, Wood Elite Zombie suddenly said, "Father, I know you are injured. I can help you. Take me back." Han Shoror, who had sunk into contemplation, was jolted awake. Soon after, he asked in a somewhat stunned manner, "Help me? What do you mean? I don't know why, but I think I can use the energy that I have just obtained to speed up the recovery process of your body." Would elite zombie transmitted? Han Shoror stared blankly for a moment. After thinking for a moment, he felt that perhaps the energy of life could really be of help to his physical body. Therefore, he cheerfully nodded, "All right, let's go back and give it a try." Upon finishing those words, Han Shoror once again carefully examined the roots of the tree of life that had lost the energy of life and had turned into a pile of bones. He discovered that there was not a trace of life energy left in it. With a wave of his large hand, the soil was stirred up. The remains of the god that had died for God knows how long were buried deep in the ground. So what if one cultivated in the edict of life? One would still die. This was the rule of nature. Who could truly change it? Even if one could change the form of life, could one really be reborn? Han Shoror thought to himself as he headed upwards. When Han Shoror returned to the surface of the ocean, he discovered that the sea monster was following him pitifully. When the sea monster saw that Han Shoror was about to leave, it cautiously asked, "Did you spare me?" "That's right, I have indeed spared you. But for the time being, you will have to stay in one place." Han Shoror thought for a moment and replied in an indifferent tone. If those from the Church of Light and the Shrine of Ice were to come over to investigate and discover the sea monster's presence, it was very likely that they would discover Han Shoror's hiding place through the sea monster. Therefore, Han Shoror planned to bring the sea monster into the cemetery of death until this matter was over. But I can't leave the water for too long," the sea monster said anxiously. "You have already reached this realm. You can at least change your body shape, right?" Han Shoror asked smilingly after thinking for a moment. "That's possible," the sea monster answered honestly. "That's good then. Come, shrink yourself a little. I will let you have water," Han Shoror said smilingly. The sea monster had an ominous premonition. However, it was afraid that Han Shoror would kill it. Therefore, it obediently changed its body shape. In the end, it turned into a strange octopus that was slightly smaller than a human and had shell armor. A large glass container suddenly covered it. Han Shoror filled the glass container with water and said with an evil smile, "Isn't this good? You will always have water." "Ah, no. I don't want to become like this. This is too humiliating." The sea monster cried out loudly. It wanted to cry but had no tears. "It's not up to you," Han Shoror said mischievously. He applied a few boundaries on the large glass container and carried it back to the gourd-shaped island. They walked into the cemetery of death. After casually placing the sea monster on the ground, Han Shoror and Wood Elite Zombie arrived at Han Shoror's main body. Han Shoror's main body had suffered extremely serious injuries. Even with Han Shoror's astonishing regenerative ability, it wasn't an easy task for him to recover in a short period of time. After Wood Elite Zombie arrived, he placed the viride leaf on the chest of Han Shoror's main body. Through the viride leaf, life energy slowly poured into Han Shoror's body that was riddled with scars. Han Shoror's body didn't have the slightest trace of the elemental energy of death. The vigorous life energy didn't reject his main body. As soon as it entered Han Shoror's main body, under Wood Elite Zombie's control, it suddenly underwent a transformation. Under the effect of the life energy, the recovery process was accelerated by tens of times. His internal organs, tendons, veins, and bones were rapidly recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was extremely miraculous. It didn't take long before all the important parts of Han Shoror's body returned to normal. Not a single trace of blood could be seen. The demonic yuan could once again flow rapidly and unimpeded through his body. The heavy injuries he suffered from using the demonic blood disassembly were greatly healed. What a miraculous life energy! Han Shoror stood up and laughed heartily. Chapter 648. How is it? Not bad, right? The Wood Elite Zombie smugly asked Han Shoror for credit after he was done with all this. Very good. Han Shuro praised from the bottom of his heart. Hehe, this is a lot of energy. I will need some time to digest it. Now, I can be as strong as them, Wood Elite Zombie transmitted to Han Shuro. Han Shuro understood Wood Elite Zombie's intention. He nodded and sent Wood Elite Zombie back to the netherworld without saying a word. In the following days, Han Shuro stayed in the cemetery of death. Thanks to Wood Elite Zombie's life energy, his physical body had fully recovered and became even more resilient and powerful than before. Every time the demonic body was damaged and repaired, it would become even stronger than before. This was an extremely frightening characteristic. After Han Shuro's body was fully healed, his demonic yuan flowed unimpeded through his body. The terrifying energy was concealed in his demonic infant. The recovery of his physical body had consumed some of Han Shuro's demonic yuan. Fortunately, as his physical body was fully healed, he only needed some time to replenish all the demonic yuan he had consumed. Han Shuro's two avatars remained in the cemetery of death, silently comprehending the energy of death and addictal force. His avatar of death, having obtained the divine soul of a mid-god, had advanced to the mid-stage low-god realm after 2 battles with the primordius dragon and the mid-god's comprehension of the elemental energy of death. After becoming a god, the advancement of even a small realm was a long process. If any ordinary god were to know that Han Shuro could advance his avatar of death from early stage to mid-stage in such a short period of time, they would surely be astonished by Han Shuro's speed. As his avatar of destruction did not have any experience in the Edict of Destruction to digest, its advancement wasn't as fast as his avatar of death. However, Han Shuro wasn't discouraged. After every battle, he would diligently comprehend the usage of the Edict of Destruction and the true essence of the operation of the Edict of Destruction. Regardless of the situation outside, Han Shuro's state of mind wasn't affected in the slightest while he was in the cemetery of death. He silently comprehended the true essence of energy. With one thought, Han Shuro suddenly sensed that 3 souls had formed a miraculous connection with him. After a while, Han Shuro's face lit up with joy. His body flashed, and he suddenly landed in the open space in front of the cemetery of death. The spirit demon formation that Han Shuro had moved here no longer had any strange changes. The spirit demons that were placed in a triangular formation did not seem to have any vitality. However, Han Shuro could sense the consciousness of the 3 spirit demons. As expected, the refinement was successful. Han Shuro smiled and mumbled to himself. He walked to the location of the first spirit demon and reached out his hand. Devil light glowed from his palm and shone on the spirit demon. Han Shuro slowly closed his eyes and practiced with the spirit demon inside, carrying out the liberation of his soul. Gradually, the dark radiance enveloped Han Shuro's palm. The spirit demon that was in a dormant state seemed to be very excited when it sensed Han Shuro's existence. Its soul was very lively. Like a butterfly breaking out of its cocoon, the faint mist that enveloped the spirit demon was blown away by the wind. A hazy shadow twisted within the mist and suddenly flew out. It flashed into Han Shuro's body and disappeared. An unfamiliar energy was entrenched in his demonic infant like a small worm. It appeared to be very peaceful. The newly born spirit demon was extremely reliant on Han Shuro. It also needed Han Shuro's energy to replenish its growth. Han Shuro was well aware of this. Han Shuro repeated the same method. The other 2 spirit demons shrank to the size of a grain of rice and entrenched themselves in Han Shuro's demonic infant. Compared to the mystical demons and yin demons that he had refined before, the spirit demon was a demon in the truest sense of the word. Although the mystical demons and yin demons were also demon generals, they mostly served as Han Shuro's eyes to spy on his surroundings. They did not possess much offensive power. Spirit demons, on the other hand, were different. Perhaps it was because the refining conditions were too harsh that not only did spirit demons inherit all the wonderful functions of the previous demon generals, they also possessed extremely powerful offensive power. Most importantly, spirit demons could evolve infinitely. Every time they evolved, they would grow stronger and their offensive power would grow more and more terrifying. Han Shuro kept the 3 spirit demons one after another. After pondering for a moment, he destroyed the formation used to refine spirit demons. Han Shoror did not leave the cemetery of death at such a crucial moment. Han Shoror also withdrew his 2 avatars into his body. He sat cross-legged next to the enormous interplanar transportation matrix, waiting for the experts from the alien material plane to descend. ****** On the summit of a barren mountain near Brettel City, the few gods who had arrived earlier gathered together. Kaiser and Eriksson wore grave expressions. They appeared extremely agitated, as though they were troubled by something. Have you searched the entire continent? Caesar was silent for a long time before he suddenly asked. We've searched almost the entire continent, but we still couldn't find any trace of him, Eriksson of the Shrine of Ice answered with a gloomy face. Where exactly did that youngster place the interplanar transportation matrix? Why can't we find any trace of it? Although that youngster's strength is mediocre, he's still an opponent that we can't afford to ignore. Kaiser scratched his head in annoyance and sighed. Eriksson, who had fought against Han Shoror before, nodded and agreed, that's right. I've fought against that youngster before. He's very cunning and has a firm will. He's definitely not someone who gives in easily. If we can't find him, we won't know the location of the interplanar transportation matrix. We don't have much time left. Those guys should be arriving soon. We're in big trouble now. Why don't we capture all of that youngster's friends, release this information, and wait for him to take the bait? The woman suggested after thinking for a moment. Kaiser creased his brows and said unhappily, Mary, no matter what, we are gods. There's no need to resort to such a despicable method. Besides, I don't think such a method will work. Forget it. The beautiful woman stared blankly for a moment. She responded respectfully on the surface, but she was cursing inwardly. It's not like the Church of Light hasn't done such things before. Why are you acting so righteous? We can't find that youngster no matter what. Why don't we destroy the Calamity Church first? Eriksson suggested. Kaiser shook his head and rejected the idea. The Calamity Church of a mere low-level material plane isn't worth our time. How about this? We haven't figured out the path to the underground world yet. While we still have some time, let's first figure out the path to the deepest part of the underground world. If possible, we'll cut off their path. What do you all think? Entering the deepest part of the underground world was indeed much more important than destroying the Calamity Church. After hearing Kaiser's suggestion, the few of them pondered for a moment and agreed to Kaiser's decision. After making up their minds, the few of them soared into the sky and flew towards the entrance to the underground world from the dark forest. Not far from the barren mountain beneath them, in the depths of a quagmire, there was a small-scale transportation matrix that led to the boundless sea. However, this small-scale interplanar transportation matrix had been concealed by Han Shoror using a demonic secret art. Although these gods from high-level material planes had searched with all their might, they were unable to detect the concealment magic deployed by demonic arts. They were unable to find traces of Han Shoror through the small-scale interplanar transportation matrix not far away. It was a good thing that Han Shoror had meticulously blocked the small transportation matrix with the power of demonic yuan before he'd left. Otherwise, with the strength of these people, they might really have been able to find the small transportation matrix and use it to capture Han Shoror, dealing him a devastating blow. The underground world, the hiding place of the dark dragons. Grandpa, I should go back. Brian must be worried about me after being away for so long. If I don't go find him soon, he'll tear me apart. Gilbert had been staying here for some time. During this time, Gilbert and his grandfather, Gilges, had enjoyed the bliss of a family and paid their respects to his deceased father. Gilges was extremely excited to see his grandson. Previously, Gilbert had exhausted his life force for the sake of the dark dragons, causing the old fellow to be in agony for a long period of time. Although Han Shoror had promised Gilges that he would definitely return a lively little dark dragon to him, Gilges had always thought that Han Shoror was merely comforting him. Especially after Han Shoror had entered the Abyss Realm, there had been no news of him for 5 years. Gilges had indeed believed that Han Shoror had died in the hands of the Church of Light. He had truly despaired. In the saddest days of his life, Dark Dragon Gilbert had suddenly appeared. Moreover, his strength had improved by leaps and bounds. For Gilges, he had been pleasantly surprised and had repeatedly urged Gilbert to stay and spend some time with him. These days were the happiest for the patriarch of the Dark Dragons, Gilges. He had dragged the little Dark Dragon to tell him many old stories of the Dark Dragons, allowing the little Dark Dragon to understand many secrets of the Dark Dragons. The old Dark Dragon had the intention of letting Gilbert take over the Dark Dragons. Therefore, he had taken the trouble to tell him the secrets of the Dark Dragons, as well as the principles of the Dark Dragons. Although Gilbert wasn't interested in taking over the Dark Dragons, he couldn't resist the old Dark Dragon's enthusiasm. Therefore, he had to listen to everything with a bitter face. "Brat, you're always talking about Brian this and Brian that. Even I, your grandpa, am a little jealous." The old Dark Dragon puffed his beard and glared, pretending to be displeased. In his heart, the old Dark Dragon was very grateful to Han Shoror. Not only because Han Shoror had resurrected Gilbert, but also because Han Shoror had saved the Dark Dragons back in the underground world. From Gilbert, the old Dark Dragon learned that Han Shoror was getting stronger and stronger. Therefore, the old Dark Dragon was very gratified and relieved that Gilbert was with Han Shoror. Brian isn't as long-winded as you are. I'm already sick of hearing you talk about the past every day. This place is really a little boring. It's much more interesting when I'm with Blair. You see, if I were by his side, I could have put in some effort to avenge my clansmen when the Shrine of Ice was annihilated, Gilbert said in a frivolous manner. Forget it, forget it. I've said all that needs to be said. You can go back and find your Brian. But remember, whenever you're free, come back and visit this old man. Otherwise, I'll rush to the surface world and catch you and give you a good beating, the old Dark Dragon threatened. Got it, got it. You're so long-winded. Gilbert replied with a headache and flew outside. He was really tired of listening to the old Dark Dragon's explanation of the secrets of the Dark Dragons. The old Dark Dragon smiled bitterly and sighed. He thought to himself, this kid is really a good-for-nothing. I've raised you up, but all you know is to run outside every day. That kid Brian really has some tricks up his sleeve. Not long after Dark Dragon Gilbert left, Kaiser and his party suddenly arrived. Previously, Ericsson had already learned from Ice Celestial Corey that the secret leading to the deepest part of the underground world was held by the race of Dark Dragons. With their remarkable abilities, it only took them a brief investigation to find the hiding place of the Dark Dragons. Who are you people? The old Dark Dragon was instinctively afraid of Kaiser's scent and Ericsson's icy aura. He hastily shouted and asked. The Dark Dragons that were entrenched in various directions rushed over upon hearing the news. They looked at the uninvited guests as if they were facing a great enemy. You're the patriarch of the Dark Dragons? Kaiser smiled and asked mildly. That's right. What do you want? How did you find this place? The old Dark Dragon was flustered. He suddenly felt so powerless in front of these people that he couldn't even muster the strength to resist. That's right. Kaiser chuckled and sternly said to Gilges, Little worm, tell me the secret to the deepest part of the underground world that you've been guarding all this time. Maybe if I'm in a good mood, I'll leave some of you alive. Who are you people? What do you want? The old Dark Dragon was horrified and hastily said, Everyone, run. Run as far as you can. The old Dark Dragon shrieked. You're too ignorant of the times. Kaiser frowned and shook his head. He then instructed the few people behind him, except for this old one, kill the rest. Ericsson remained motionless. The other gods with weaker strength made their moves one after another. The Dark Dragons didn't even have the chance to escape. They were like worms in front of them. They didn't even have the strength to resist and quickly died in their hands. In just a few blinks of an eye, the ground was littered with the corpses of the Dark Dragons. Not a single Dark Dragon managed to escape. I won't say anything even if I die. Sooner or later, someone will avenge us. The old Dark Dragon was inconsolable and was ready to commit suicide. Dean, get me the secret of his soul before he dies, Kaiser casually instructed. Caesar casually instructed before he chuckled light-heartedly and muttered to himself. Who in this continent can take revenge for all of you? What a naive reptile. An even younger god instantly appeared above the old dark dragon's head. A ray of light shrouded the old dark dragon's head. The old dark dragon suddenly let out a miserable shriek as his life force gradually disappeared. All right, I've found it. I'll lead the way. The young god called. Dean closed his palm. The old dark dragon fell to the ground with his eyes wide open. Everyone, let's go, Kaiser instructed, and the group swaggered off. Inside the Cemetery of Death, the enormous interplanar transportation matrix next to Han Shaw suddenly shone brightly, startling Han Shaw out of his meditative state. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.